Welcome to the Lily apartment, a place where the drama is as thick as the dust on the bookshelves, and the secrets are even juicier. You'd think living with a group of beautiful women would be a dream, but for our girl Xuanzi, it's a chaotic roller coaster of emotions, obsession, and, well, the occasional giant bug. We start the day with a scene that would make any gossip lover's heart skip a beat. Xiao Yu, looking a bit flushed, leans in close to Xuanzi with a look that screams, "I have a proposal you can't refuse." The air in the room suddenly feels heavy with a tension you could cut with a knife as Xiao Yu whispers Xuanzi to sit on top of her, warning her to be gentle because it might hurt. Xuanzi's face turns a bright shade of crimson, her heart hammering against her ribs as she wonders if this is finally the moment. But alas, the romantic tension shatters into a million pieces when we see it's actually just a very intense, very painful back massage. Xiao Yu lets out a long, exhausted groan, the physical toll of her busy schedule finally catching up to her. She looks over at the ever-cool Mingli, wondering if she's finally free from her own mountain of work. Meanwhile, in another corner of the apartment, Mingli is dealing with her own brand of chaos as she's being forcibly dressed up in something super cute against her will. "Save me," she cries out, reaching a hand toward the door as her roommate ruthlessly pursues the ultimate makeover. Finally, we meet our main narrator, Xuanzi, a cool-headed university student just trying to survive the semester. She's currently living in the Lily apartment with her girlfriend, though living might be a generous term for the domestic battlefield they inhabit. Xuanzi is a girl of simple tastes. She loves her music, her manga, and a bit of peace and quiet. But peace is a rare commodity when her girlfriend, Jane, bursts into the room with a terrifying aura, screaming about the crumbs left on the bed. Jane is the definition of a perfectionist, and right now, she's looking at Xuanzi like she's a particularly stubborn stain on the carpet. Xuanzi can only offer a weak, trembling smile, knowing she's about to get a lecture that'll last longer than her morning classes. Jane, a professional columnist, takes everything seriously. She's the kind of person who can spot a single misaligned book from across the room with predatory precision. Before Xuanzi can even defend her honor, Jane is literally dragging her by the hair toward the scene of the crime. You see, Jane isn't just a writer. She's a domestic goddess with a very low tolerance for mess. She prides herself on being a lead at everything she touches, especially when it involves a vacuum and a bottle of bleach. Xuanzi watches her, a mix of admiration and genuine fear swirling in her chest, as Jane stares intensely at a shelf. Sometimes she's so serious it's cute. Xuanzi thinks, though that thought quickly vanishes when Jane starts muttering about needing a bigger bookshelf to satisfy her organizational soul. But the real drama starts when Xuanzi accidentally reveals a hidden stash of cash in her pocket. Jane's eyes narrow, her analytical brain immediately running the numbers on Xuanzi's monthly budget and finding a massive discrepancy. A dark shadow falls over Jane's face as she wonders if her girlfriend is keeping secrets or worse, planning an escape. The suspicion is so thick you could choke on it, and poor Xuanzi is left sweating bullets as Jane points toward the door and commands her to get out. Jane declares that a real cleaning session always begins with a ruthless purge of the trash. She holds up a pair of sunglasses with a look of pure disdain, deciding they simply don't fit her aesthetic anymore. Next on the chopping block is a sweatband as Jane's cleaning fire begins to burn brighter and more terrifyingly. Xuanzi can only watch in horror as her belongings are literally kicked out of the room by a very determined foot. An hour later, the dust has settled and Jane wipes her brow, looking satisfied with her conquered territory. Xuanzi stands nearby, giving a shaky thumbs up, exhausted but relieved to have survived the ordeal. Just then, Xiao Yu and Mingli stumble back into the apartment, looking like they've been through a war zone. They stop dead in their tracks, staring at the sparkling, suspiciously clean living room. Xiao Yu's heart drops into her stomach as she realizes the cleaning bug has officially infected the house. Jane turns her icy, bespectacled gaze toward Xiao Yu, asking the one question the poor girl was dreading. "What about your room?" Xiao Yu tries to play it cool, laughing nervously and claiming her room is the pinnacle of tidiness. But the skeptical looks from Jane and Xuanzi are enough to make anyone crumble. They march toward the door, Jane's suspicion reaching an all-time high as she prepares for the worst. Xiao Yu tries to act like a responsible adult, puffing out her chest while Mingli watches with a knowing, tired expression. Xuanzi peeks inside the room, her eyes widening as she spots something truly horrifying hidden under a mountain of clothes. It's a literal landslide of mess, a chaotic abyss that would make a hoarder blush. Xiao Yu tries to defend herself, arguing that shoving everything into a dark closet definitely counts as cleaning. But the comedy turns to a horror movie in a split second when Xuanzi calmly points out a bug. Xiao Yu lets out a high-pitched eep, her soul nearly leaving her body. Jane sighs, beginning a lecture about how a lack of hygiene is an open invitation for unwanted guests. Then, the unthinkable happens. Jane points out that there is a giant cockroach currently hitching a ride on Xiao Yu's shoulder. Xiao Yu laughs it off at first, convinced it's just another one of Xuanzi's cruel pranks. But Jane's face is dead serious, her eyes fixed on the crawling intruder. The realization realization hits Xiao Yu like a freight train, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She lets out a scream that probably shattered windows 3 blocks away. She collapses to the floor, begging for anyone to get the monster off of her. Xuanzi looks down at the beast and realizes the poor thing didn't survive the encounter with Xiao Yu's panic. The girls huddle around the fallen foe, poking at it with a stick to ensure the nightmare is truly over. But the horror isn't finished yet, as they realize the roach might have left behind some parting gifts in the form of eggs. Xiao Yu is back to square one, screaming and flailing as the others try to maintain some semblance of order. Ming Li, the only one with a stomach of steel, scoops up the remains in a tissue with a look of utter boredom. She marches toward the bathroom, the silent executioner of the household pests. With a single, decisive flush, the journey of the cockroach comes to a watery end. Ming Li meticulously washes her hands, the trauma of the morning finally being scrubbed away. She returns to the room and gently pats a traumatized Xiao Yu on the head, calling her a little shithead with a hidden, affectionate smile. But the peace is short-lived when Ming Li announces that the cleaning spree isn't over yet. A wave of genuine panic washes over Ming Li as she remembers the shameful secrets hidden in her own room. In another corner, one of the girls is sweating as she thinks about the secret fan art and cookies she's been hiding. They both desperately try to wave off the idea of anyone entering their private sanctuaries. The conversation shifts to a strange delivery of fan mail that has arrived for the mysterious LZ. They huddle around the box, their curiosity piqued by the sheer volume of stuff inside. The first item pulled out is a pair of undergarments, then a wig. The girls look at the contents with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. Xiao Yu picks up a letter, her brow furrowed as she begins to read. The letter is a chilling gift of love from a secret admirer who claims to have been watching from afar. The girls exchange a look of pure dread, wondering if they have a genuine stalker on their hands. Little do they know, the pervert might be closer than they think. What other scandalous secrets are hiding behind the doors of Lily apartment? Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. Jane was a woman possessed, her fingers dancing across the keyboard in a rhythmic, obsessive clatter as the month drew to a close. From the safety of the hallway, Xuanzi watched with a cold sweat, her heart sinking as she witnessed the transformation of her roommate into a deadline-driven monster. Jane's eyes were sunken, her shoulders pulled tight with a tension that radiated through the entire apartment. It was a familiar, terrifying sight. The end of the month meant only one thing: the columnist's deadline was looming like a shadow over their lives. You see, Jane wasn't just any writer. She was a woman who demanded absolute authenticity in every review she penned. If she was writing about thrills, she was on the front lines, her face a mask of clinical observation, even as the wind whipped her hair into a frenzy on a roller coaster. While others screamed in terror, Jane was the only soul in the haunted house calmly checking her phone, unimpressed by the plastic ghouls. She would even subject herself to a brutal arm lock just to describe the exact sensation of a joint being pushed to its limit. But tonight, the atmosphere shifted into something far more intimate as Jane leaned out of her doorway, her gaze locking onto Xuanzi with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Xuanzi, come here," she murmured, and the request felt heavy with a mystery that sent a shiver down her roommate's spine. Xuanzi's heart began to hammer against her ribs as she followed her into the darkness, wondering why on earth they were sitting together in a room with no lights. Jane reached out, her fingers warm as they slipped into Xuanzi's hand, her voice dropping to a low, husky whisper that promised something life-changing. Xuanzi's mind raced, her face flushing a deep crimson as she imagined a confession, a moment of raw vulnerability between them. She could almost see it playing out like a scene from a movie, where Jane would finally break down, clinging to her and sobbing about how scared she was. But as the screen flickered to life, the high-pitched shriek of a jump scare tore through the silence of the room. Instead of the romantic embrace she expected, Xuanzi found herself the one cowering in fear while Jane stood over her, patting her head with the detached pity of a scientist observing a lab rat. "I just wanted to see what these horror movies were really like," Jane explained, her eyes fixed on her notebook, as if the terror of her friend was merely data. She began to deconstruct the genre with a cold logic, claiming that once you expect the monster, the fear simply evaporates into thin air. To Jane, the true horror wasn't the monster on screen, but the way the industry was shackled by censorship, forcing gore to be replaced by mere sound effects. Xuanzi could only stare in disbelief as Jane complained that a scene cutting to black with a few moans just wasn't scary at all. Jane began to sketch her ideas for a safe ghost, one that would pass the censors but still provide a shock. She tried again, adding a bit more supernatural flair, though it looked more like a floating sheet than a harbinger of doom. Every iteration seemed more ridiculous than the last, a desperate attempt to find a visual that could actually bypass the strict rules of the industry. Eventually, she sighed, concluding that the most boring trope of all was when the ghost turned out to be nothing more than her demons. The next morning, the exhaustion was written across their faces, and Xiao Yu couldn't help but notice the state of her friends as they stumbled into the kitchen. "You two look like you were up all night," she teased, a mischievous glint in her eye as she watched them sway on their feet. Xuanzi's face exploded in a blush as she tried to explain that Jane had forced her into a long night of intense activity. The misunderstanding hung thick in the air until the clock struck 3, revealing the mundane truth of their horror movie marathon. Xiao Yu laughed, realizing the passionate night she imagined was actually just a grueling brainstorming session for Jane's latest article. She wondered aloud if she should try watching a few movies with Akari, hoping for a bit more excitement than Jane had found. But as Xuanzi described a scene involving a razor and a chest, the mood quickly soured into one of visceral discomfort. Xiao Yu winced, her hand flying to her own chest as she felt a phantom pain just from the description of the movie's gore. As they settled in for snacks, Xiao Yu lamented the lack of truly classic horror movies in the current year. They began to reminisce about the stories their grandparents told them, the strange tales that haunted their childhood summer breaks. Xiao Yu's eyes lit up as she mentioned the legend of the white snake, her voice filled with a sudden, nostalgic passion. She even began to tear up at the thought of the happy ending, leaving Xuanzi to point out that a romance was hardly a horror story. Suddenly, the door swung open and Jane appeared once more, her notebook clutched like a weapon as she scanned the room for her next victim. "I still need to experience a shoulder throw," she announced, her voice flat and determined as she stared at her friends. Xiao Yu, always eager to help, stood up with a grin while Akari looked on, clearly confused by the box she was carrying. Xuanzi gave the instructions, telling Xiao Yu to just go for it and trust the process. With a battle cry that echoed through the apartment, Xiao Yu lunged forward, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated determination. She grabbed Akari, twisting her body with everything she had in a desperate attempt to execute the perfect martial arts move. But physics had other plans, and a second later, Xiao Yu was the one eating the floorboards while Akari stood there, completely unscathed. Without a moment of hesitation, Jane knelt down beside the fallen girl, pen poised to record exactly how much it hurt. Hours later, Jane finally leaned back from her laptop, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips as she rubbed her aching neck. She peeked around the corner, calling out to Xuanzi with a softness that hinted at a peace offering. Xuanzi looked up, her heart fluttering once again as she wondered if Jane was finally going to make up for the terror of the night before. But as they sat down together, the only thing Jane offered was a lesson in meditation, telling her to breathe and become one with nature. The morning sun was bright, but Xiao Yu's mood was even more radiant as she chirped a happy greeting to her roommates. Jane, ever the calm soul, barely looked up from her morning snack to acknowledge the sudden burst of energy. Even the perpetually sleepy LZ was greeted with a radiant rise and shine that felt a bit too enthusiastic for such a quiet hour. The girls exchanged knowing glances, whispering that something wonderful must be happening, and they all suspected a certain date with the beautiful Akari was the cause. Xuanzi, leaning back with her usual cool demeanor, couldn't help but poke fun at the situation, asking what there was to be so nervous about for a simple movie date. Xiao Yu's face instantly caught fire, her voice rising in a frantic defense as she pointed out that Xuanzi gets to spend every single night with Jane, unlike her. "Do you have any idea what this feels like?" she wailed, her fists clenched in a mix of passion and pure romantic agony. Xuanzi and Jane just stared back with blank expressions, completely unmoved by her dramatic outburst. Xuanzi pointed out the obvious. Xiao Yu and Akari are together every single day for work, so why was today any different? "That's just for work," Xiao Yu cried, flashing back to how she'd happily cheer for Akari at the start of their shifts. But the reality was much colder. Once work ended, Akari was always swept away by professional obligations, leaving Xiao Yu standing in the shadows. Xuanzi's blunt observation that they don't actually interact much at all sent Xiao Yu spiraling into a pit of despair. "I can't even think straight when I'm looking at her," she confessed, clutching her head as the mere thought of Akari sent her brain into a meltdown. She pictured Akari in her mind, looking breathtakingly sharp and elegant, a vision that made Xiao Yu feel like a bumbling mess in comparison. Her heart started racing so fast she could barely breathe, the dizzying weight of her crush making the world spin. Xuanzi watched her panicked gasping with a raised eyebrow, genuinely wondering if the poor girl was having a medical emergency. Seeing her friend in such a state, Xuanzi offered a smirk of encouragement, insisting there was no one better at winning over girls than her. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted as a calm, melodic voice broke through the chaos, wishing everyone a good morning. It was Akari. Xiao Yu's brain short-circuited instantly, her greeting coming out as a mangled, stuttering mess of syllables. The sheer intensity of her nerves was too much to bear, and she collapsed forward, falling right into Xuanzi's startled arms. Jane adjusted her glasses, clinically suggesting that Xiao Yu had simply worked far too much overtime and needed rest. With the patient settled, Jane and Xuanzi decided to head out for their errands, leaving the two of them alone. Akari, ever polite, assumed she should leave as well to let her friend sleep in peace. But Xiao Yu bolted upright, her voice cracking as she screamed for Akari to stay by her side. Akari leaned in close, her blue eyes searching Xiao Yu's face with a look of genuine, heart-stopping concern. Overwhelmed by the proximity, Xiao Yu dove under the covers, hiding her flaming cheeks from the woman she adored. Her mind raced with desperate schemes, wondering if she should pretend to be even sicker just to keep Akari from walking out that door. She spiraled into a tragic fantasy, imagining Akari finding someone else to marry, while she ended up old and alone. Akari's gentle voice cut through the dark thoughts, telling her to just lie down while she went to brew some tea. Xiao Yu peeked out from the blankets, stunned by the domesticity of the offer and wondering if Akari actually knew her way around a kitchen. She realized that even if their date was ruined, being pampered and cared for by Akari was was a dream come true. Soon, Akari returned with a steaming cup, her smile so serene it felt like a healing balm. As Xiao Yu sipped the tea, Akari reached out, her cool palm pressing against Xiao Yu's flushed cheek to check her temperature. "I know a good way to help you feel better," Akari whispered, her expression turning uncharacteristically serious. Then, with a completely straight face, she told Xiao Yu the words that made her heart stop. "Take off your shirt first." Xiao Yu's eyes nearly popped out of her head as she clutched her collar, stammering that they weren't nearly close enough for that yet. Akari simply blinked, realizing the misunderstanding, and clarified that she only intended to wipe down her back to break the fever. She began preparing a bottle of rubbing alcohol, explaining that it was a trick she always used to cool down. Xiao Yu's imagination went wild again as she asked if they were doing a full-body wipe, her voice trembling. Akari gave her a look of pure, innocent confusion, wondering why her friend was acting so strange. Xiao Yu eventually settled back, feeling the bite of the cold towel Akari placed gently across her forehead. She looked up at Akari, her heart full of gratitude for the woman who was going through so much trouble just for her. The room was quiet, filled only with the faint, medicinal scent of alcohol and the sound of their breathing. Xiao Yu closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation of Akari's slender fingers moving with such tenderness. When she opened her eyes again, she realized Akari had taken the cooling mission a bit too literally, covering her body in dozens of fever patches. Despite the ridiculous sight, Xiao Yu knew she couldn't let this day end without saying what was on her heart. She struggled to sit up, her gaze fixed on Akari as she prepared to ask the big question once more. "I wanted to ask you, can we go on a..." she started, but the roses in her imagination wilted as her strength finally gave out, and she fell back into the pillows, truly sick this time. Xia Hezi's heart had always been tethered to the sweet scent of yeast and sugar, memories of her childhood spent watching her grandfather's weathered hands craft magic in his small bakery. But when the warmth of his presence was replaced by a cold, hollow ache, she vowed to carry on his legacy with every ounce of her being. With a gaze burning with determination, she donned the baker's whites, promising the heavens that she would become a master of the craft. Reality, however, was a far more bitter pill to swallow, as Akari stared down at a charred, unidentifiable lump that was supposed to be a simple breakfast egg. The morning sun brought no relief for a groggy Xiao Yu, who stumbled into the room with her hair a mess and her energy completely depleted. Seeing the spread on the table, she perked up instantly, her stomach growling for the meal she assumed would be a delicious start to her day. Hezi, ever the optimist, leaned in with a bright smile, confirming she was the one behind the morning's culinary endeavor. But as the first bite hit Xiao Yu's tongue, her face contorted in a silent scream before she violently spat the disaster across the room. This wasn't a one-time fluke. The first week of her training had yielded a rainbow pudding that looked more like a shimmering void of darkness. By the second week, her attempt at a matcha baguette resembled a sentient green sludge that defied the laws of physics. Even the third week offered no mercy, presenting a red bean potato bun that glowed with an ominous, sickly light. Xiao Yu threw her hands up in despair, questioning if these creations were even legally classified as edible matter. The weight of her failure finally seemed to press down on Hezi, her shoulders slumping as she wondered if she truly lacked her grandfather's golden touch. Seeing her friend's heartbreak, Xiao Yu whispered urgently to Akari, her voice laced with a mix of pity and lingering digestive trauma. They agreed in hushed tones that they couldn't be too blunt, for Hezi was clearly pouring her entire soul into these culinary catastrophes. Suddenly, the air turned frigid as Hezi turned around, a massive kitchen knife glinting dangerously in her hand as she asked if they were whispering about her. Desperate to survive the morning, Xiao Yu stammered that all Hezi needed was a proper teacher to guide her talented but chaotic hands. As if on cue, the elegant Jane appeared in the doorway, her calm aura promising a sanctuary from the kitchen nightmares. Jane took charge immediately, rolling up her sleeves and promising that baking was a simple matter of following the right steps. With the grace of a professional, Jane whipped up a perfect, strawberry-topped sponge cake in the blink of an eye, leaving the others reeling in shock. She began the lesson with the basics, explaining with a serene smile that every masterpiece starts with the careful mixing of ingredients. Hezi followed along with intense focus, her brow furrowing as she whisked the batter under Jane's watchful eye. But the rhythm was broken when Jane reached for the next bowl, only to realize the flour had vanished into thin air. In the background, the chaotic duo of Xiao Yu and Akari were caught red-handed, playing around and causing a distraction while the flour sat forgotten on the counter. Despite the hiccups, Jane peered into the bowl and gave a small nod of approval. Noting that the consistency was finally looking right, she encouraged Hezi to add her own personal flair, telling her to choose the flavors that spoke most deeply to her heart. Hezi paused, her finger to her chin as she contemplated the perfect combination of taste to define her creation. When Jane asked what she had chosen, Hezi proudly listed a nightmare trio of ingredients: hot sauce, cola, and chocolate. The resulting cake sat on the table like a dark omen, its strange purple hue making the girl's skin crawl with apprehension. Hezi, oblivious to the danger, lifted a spoonful and offered it to Akari with a hopeful, shimmering gaze. Akari took the bite out of pure loyalty, her face instantly turning ashen as the spicy, carbonated chocolate attacked her senses. Wiping a bead of sweat from her brow, Akari pleaded with Hezi to never feed her anything that experimental ever again. Jane sighed, leaning against the counter and asking what exactly Hezi had been doing during her supposed apprenticeship at the bakery. A memory flickered back, not of kneading dough, but of a younger Hizai struggling under a mountain of heavy plates. She remembered the endless hours spent scrubbing windows until they sparkled, far away from the warmth of the ovens. She had even spent her time dutifully disposing of the day's leftovers, which mostly involved eating them herself in the back room. Jane realized with a groan that her friend had learned absolutely nothing about the actual art and science of baking. She tried a different approach, explaining that the most vital ingredient wasn't found in a pantry, but in the heart of the baker. She recalled her own high school teacher, a man who believed that a cake was merely a vessel for one's deepest emotions. It's important to pour your love into the cake. The teacher's voice echoed like a sacred commandment in Jane's memory. Hizai took the advice with terrifying literalness, her expression turning somber as she prepared to pour her love into the next batch. Xiao Yu watched her curiously, wondering why Hizai was so obsessed with getting this specific cake right today. Blushing furiously, Hizai confessed that she wanted to celebrate Akari's upcoming performance, her heart racing at the thought of her friend's success. Akari's eyes welled with tears of pure emotion, deeply touched by the depth of Hizai's clumsy but sincere affection. However, the sentimentality vanished the moment Hizai presented the finished purple monstrosity, her eyes wide with a terrifyingly cheerful excitement. "Don't be shy, let me feed you," Hizai chirped, moving in with the spoon while Akari backed away in a state of pure panic. Just then, another roommate burst through the door, her stomach growling so loudly it nearly drowned out the kitchen drama. Seeing the cake, the hungry girl didn't hesitate for a second, diving in for a massive bite before anyone could shout a warning. The world seemed to lose all color for the poor girl as the toxic flavors collided, leaving her frozen like a stone statue of pure culinary regret. The air in the room was thick with the rhythmic strumming of strings as Xuanzi lost herself in the music, her fingers dancing across the fretboard. But the melody was interrupted when Akari leaned in, her eyes sparkling with genuine admiration as she praised the cool performance. At that moment, a single realization echoed through Xiao Yu's mind like a thunderclap, repeating over and over. Akari likes guitarists. Driven by a sudden, desperate surge of jealousy and desire, Xiao Yu lunged forward and grabbed Xuanzi, screaming for her to teach her the secrets of the instrument. Xuanzi could only blink in stunned silence, wondering why her friend had suddenly become so obsessed with mastering the guitar. Xiao Yu slumped down, her voice trembling with insecurity as she realized that everyone in their circle had a special talent from writing to kendo except for her. She even pointed out that Hizai had his own specialty, though she begrudgingly admitted it was mostly just being incredibly tall. As she stood next to him, the sheer height difference made her feel even smaller, her heart aching with a peculiar sort of envy. Xuanzi tried to comfort her, reminding her that being a fashion designer was incredibly romantic, especially if she made clothes for the one she loved. But Xiao Yu sighed, feeling that a work-related gift couldn't possibly compete with the soul-stirring power of a love song. Suddenly, a scandalous vision flashed through her mind, a moment of intense heat, where she would help Akari slide her shirt off her shoulders. Xuanzi's face turned bright red as she shrieked at her friend, calling her out for having such shamelessly perverted fantasies. Leaning back with a sigh, Xuanzi reminded her that chasing a girl's heart is an art form that requires more than just raw talent. She pulled Xiao Yu close, whispering that instead of showing off, she should try to find out exactly what Akari's heart truly desires. With a newfound determination burning in her eyes, Xiao Yu marched toward the door, ready to confront the girl of her dreams. But before she could even think, Xuanzi blurted out a question so scandalous it left Xiao Yu screaming in embarrassment. Xiao Yu's courage instantly evaporated, and she tried to hide her blushing face behind Xuanzi's back as the door finally opened. She peeked out timidly, trying to frame her desperate inquiry as a mere school project about what women find most attractive. Akari tapped her chin thoughtfully, a playful smile dancing on her lips as she admitted that cute girls who play guitar are incredibly popular. The words felt like a dagger to Xiao Yu's heart, and she immediately turned her fury on Xuanzi, convinced she was being mocked. The chaotic scene was interrupted by Hizai, who wandered into the room with a steaming mug and a look of mild confusion. Xuanzi tried to explain that they were currently in the middle of a heated debate over which traits make a person truly irresistible. Hizai went quiet for a moment, the steam from his drink rising as he carefully considered the weight of their argument. With a look of supreme confidence, he declared that the way to anyone's heart was clearly through their stomach, making cooking the ultimate skill. He took a slow, dramatic sip of his drink, ignoring the skeptical looks being thrown his way by the girls. He began to recount his childhood, explaining that he wasn't always popular and had to work hard to find his place. He shared memories of his younger self, a boy who took every class imaginable from dancing to kendo just to be noticed. Xiao Yu leaned in with wide eyes, breathless as she asked if all that hard work was finally what made him popular. But the tension snapped when he bluntly stated he just grew taller, prompting Xiao Yu to smash a pillow into his face in frustration. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, Xiao Yu grabbed the guitar, determined to prove she could master it in seconds. She strummed a few chords, a smug smile spreading across her face as she convinced herself she was a natural-born prodigy. Her eyes closed in bliss as she imagined herself as a rock star, her heart swelling with unearned pride. But the fantasy came to a screeching halt with a violent snap, as the guitar string broke under her clumsy fingers. Realizing music was a lost cause, she pivoted instantly, striking a heroic pose and declaring that her true talent lay in the kitchen. She donned an apron with a flourish, insisting that cooking was 80% raw talent and she had it in spades. With her back turned to her skeptical audience, she lectured them on the importance of creating a perfect, flavorful balance. The masterpiece she presented with such pride, however, turned out to be nothing more than a simple bowl of instant noodles. When He tried to offer advice, Xiao Yu snapped back, telling him he had no right to talk since he didn't even have a girlfriend. He's face flushed a deep crimson as he stammered a protest, his secret feelings bubbling just beneath the surface. The scene shifted to the quiet hours of the night, showing LZ fast asleep and completely unaware of the world around her. In the shadows, Hizi worked tirelessly, secretly baking cakes and preparing treats to surprise her when she woke. The next morning, LZ stared at the beautiful cupcake left for her, her mind racing as she wondered who her secret benefactor could be. She found a warm, fresh towel waiting for her, the small gesture of care leaving her feeling confused yet strangely comforted. As she looked at the neatly folded laundry, a blush crept onto her face, wondering who would go to such lengths for her. Back in the present, Xiao Yu looked at Hizai with utter disgust, calling him a total pervert for his secret housekeeping habits. Meanwhile, Akari wandered through the hallway, calling out for Xiao Yu as she searched for some clarification on a work project. She paused by the empty sofa, her brow furrowing when she realized the girl she was looking for had vanished. Suddenly, Xiao Yu's voice rang out from the kitchen, sounding strained and overly enthusiastic as she invited Akari inside. Akari walked in to find a sight she would never forget: Xiao Yu trying to cook a fish while balancing one foot on the broken guitar, desperately trying to look awesome. Meet LZ, a girl whose life is a constant whirlwind of flashing lights and adoring fans, for she is none other than a professional idol. But behind the glamour lies a secret that keeps her friends on a permanent edge of anxiety. Her memory is so fleeting that she stares at a fan with wide, innocent eyes, asking for the third time if it's their first performance. It isn't just the fans she forgets. Her daily life is a chaotic loop of eating extra meals and taking multiple showers simply because the memory of the first one vanished like mist. "I haven't been paid," she cries out with righteous indignation, her face flushing with a mix of confusion and heat as she confronts her manager. The struggle is real, and it often begins the moment she wakes up, her brow furrowing as she frantically searches the room for her missing belongings. "I'm trying to find my glasses," she exclaims, her voice rising in a panicked pitch, completely oblivious to the frames resting right on the bridge of her nose. Her friend Jane watches with a mixture of pity and exhaustion, pointing out that not only are the glasses there, but her earrings are securely in place as well. LZ's hand flies to her head, her breath hitching when she realizes even her watch has been on her wrist the entire time. Jane sighs, reaching out to gently adjust those very glasses, her eyes filled with a wary sort of fondness for her hopelessly forgetful friend. LZ just offers a sheepish, lopsided grin, admitting that it isn't just the accessories that go missing in the fog of her mind. "It's actually a curse," she declares dramatically, pointing a finger into the air as if challenging the very heavens for her plight. But the reality is far less supernatural. The poor girl is simply as blind as a bat without her prescription, stumbling over her own feet in a clumsy display of vulnerability. The next morning, Xuanzi emerges from her room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes and wondering why it's taking so long for a simple glass of water. Jane looks up, her expression grave as she delivers the news that Elzai has seemingly lost every single one of her memories. Xuanzi's heart hammers against her ribs, her face turning pale as the weight of the situation sinks in. "LZ! It's me, wake up!" she screams, grabbing her friend by the shoulders and shaking her with a desperation that borders on madness. Jane, realizing the drama has gone a bit too far, wonders Elzai has truly always been this hopelessly lost in her own head. LZ gazes off into the distance, a soft, melancholic shadow crossing her face as she recalls how her childhood friend, Hizi, was the only one who could ever handle her. Xuanzai and Jane exchange a look of pure, unadulterated concern, realizing the severity of the situation is deeper than they ever imagined. LZ pouts, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears of frustration as she wonders if this is all just her own fault. Desperate for a cure, she turns to Jane, pleading for any writerly trick or secret to mend her fractured memory. Jane, feeling the pressure, suggests that perhaps some traditional supplements like pig brains might do the trick to boost her cognitive functions. Xuanzi's eyes light up with a sudden, dangerous spark of inspiration, claiming she has the ultimate solution to end this nightmare once and for all. However, the plan goes hilariously awry when LZ takes the advice too literally, standing there in a full pig mask while her friends look on in stunned silence. "That is not what I meant," Xuanzi bellows, her face turning a vibrant shade of red as she realizes her friend's logic is a labyrinth no one can escape. She tries a new tactic, her voice filled with a renewed sense of hope as she prepares to unveil her next, genius idea. She decides to use LZ's own face as a canvas, writing a list of essential reminders in thick black ink so she can't possibly miss them in the mirror. LZ beams, looking like a chaotic masterpiece of sticky notes, convinced that she will finally be the master of her own destiny. The next morning, she confidently announces her departure, leaving her friends to stare in horror as she walks out the door without washing her face. When she finally returns, her hair is a bit mussed, but she carries an air of triumph that radiates from her very soul. Jane peers over the sofa, asking cautiously if the day was a success or if she left a trail of forgotten items behind her. Nope. I remembered everything, LZ chirps, only for the room to go silent when Jane points out that she forgot to change out of her frilly idol uniform. Jane can't help but wonder how on earth she manages to perform on stage if she can't even remember to put on pants. LZ just giggles, her eyes curving into sweet crescents as she admits she just mimics the person dancing next to her whenever she draws a blank. But what if you're in the front row? Jane asks, her voice trembling at the thought of the impending public disaster. LZ's smile doesn't waver as she explains her foolproof plan to simply pretend to fall so the staff will swap her out for someone who knows the steps. Determined to survive the day, LZ approaches her colleague Susu, her eyes wide and pleading as she asks to be her shadow. On stage, she is the picture of grace, her movements perfectly synchronized as she follows Susu's lead with intense focus. Even in the cafeteria, she is a silent, hovering presence, trailing behind Susu like a lost puppy looking for a home. But when the trail leads all the way to the restroom door, Susu finally snaps, her face contorting in a mixture of rage and embarrassment. Back at the apartment, Xuanzi gently pats LZ's head, her heart swelling with a protective warmth for her special friend. Jane sighs, leaning back as she realizes that perhaps this chaos is just the charm that makes LZ who she is. Of course, the peace is short-lived as LZ begins to scratch her head with a look of dawning horror that chills the air. I can't find my keys, she stammers, her voice small and trembling as the cycle of forgetfulness begins anew. Jane and Xuanzi sit together, their expressions a mix of resignation and the kind of bond only shared by those in the trenches of a crisis. Don't worry, Xuanzi says, a mysterious and knowing smile playing on her lips as she hints that the problem has already been solved. Jane's eyes widen behind her glasses, wondering if LZ finally sought professional help or found some miracle cure. But the truth is far more practical. Heezy has arrived, taking on the role of the ultimate human reminder to guide LZ through the fog of her own mind. Xiao Yu is a professional fashion designer who lives and breathes the world of style. Her days are spent meticulously sketching out the latest trends, her pencil dancing across the page with practiced ease. When she isn't creating, she's obsessively hunting for the perfect pieces, her eyes practically turning into sparkling orbs at the thought of a new haul. Yet, despite her professional expertise, she stands before her wardrobe with a look of utter despair, lamenting that she has absolutely nothing to wear. Her roommate Akari, a stunning model with an aura of effortless grace, watches from the doorway as Xiao Yu sighs over her options. Akari picks up a discarded shirt, noting that it looks perfectly new, but Xiao Yu pouts, claiming it's just a little too small for her liking. Really? Let me try it on, Akari suggests casually, her tall, slender frame towering over the flustered designer. As the fabric stretches across Akari's skin, Xiao Yu's face turns a brilliant shade of crimson, her eyes darting away as her heart begins to race. Akari gazes out at the changing season, noting that the air is finally starting to grow chilly. With a gentle smile that makes Xiao Yu's breath hitch, she asks, since the weather is still nice, how about we go out on a shopping trip today? To Xiao Yu, this isn't just a simple errand. Her mind immediately spirals into a romantic daydream where shopping leads to dating, and dating leads to marriage. CCKNI? She shouts, her voice cracking with a desperate excitement that leaves Akari looking completely baffled. Asakura Akari is a top-tier Japanese model whose beauty is as sharp as a blade. She's currently working in China and lives in the Lily apartment, where she manages to get along with everyone she meets. However, there is one major hurdle. She is as straight as a stick and possesses a remarkably innocent worldview. She remains blissfully unaware of the romantic implications of their apartment's name, even casually inviting Xiao Yu to share a bath like it's the most natural thing in the world. As they head toward the mall, Xiao Yu's imagination begins to run wild with forbidden fantasies. She imagines herself complaining about dry lips, hoping for a moment of shared intimacy. In her mind, she gasps, wondering if Akari is finally going to make a move. The imaginary Akari leans in, whispering, "Let me give you some of mine," as she tilts Xiao Yu's chin upward. The distance between them vanishes in her mind's eye, the air thickening with a heat that makes her dizzy. So sweet, the fantasy version of Akari murmurs, her blue eyes filled with a smoldering intensity. She leans in even closer, asking if Xiao Yu wants some more in a voice like velvet. Back in reality, Xiao Yu is a drooling, blushing mess, while the real Akari just looks on with a confused expression, holding a simple tube of lip balm. They finally reach the clothing store, where Xiao Yu holds up a cute pink sweater, seeking the model's expert opinion. Akari's eyes light up with genuine interest, but instead of just nodding, she calls over a clerk to ask for a larger size for herself. "It's rare for me to find something that I like. Maybe we'll just buy the same thing," she says with a radiant smile. Xiao Yu's heart practically stops. In her world, wearing matching clothes is the ultimate sign of being a couple. The store is crowded with weekend shoppers, and the fitting rooms are all occupied. Akari spots a curtain being drawn back and points it out with a cheerful grin. "It's fine, we're both girls anyway," she says, pulling a stunned Xiao Yu into the tiny, cramped fitting room with her. Xiao Yu is screaming internally, her back pressed against the wall as she tries to process the sheer proximity of her crush. Akari leans in close, her voice soft and full of concern, as she asks if Xiao Xiaoyu is feeling alright. I'm sure you'll look super cute in it, Akari encourages, her presence overwhelming the small space. Xiaoyu takes a shaky breath, resolving that she can't let Akari down, even if her heart feels like it's about to explode. She slowly begins to change, her skin prickling with a sudden, intense awareness of Akari's gaze in the silence of the booth. The air between them feels heavy and electric as they stand just inches apart. For a moment, the world outside the curtain ceases to exist, leaving only the two of them in a shared, breathless silence. When they finally finish, Xiaoyu looks like she's seen a ghost, her soul practically ascending to heaven from the sheer intensity of the encounter. At the checkout counter, the clerk smiles warmly at the pair as Akari prepares to pay. Akari insists on buying the sweaters, telling Xiaoyu with a wink that the color suits her far too well to pass up. The clerk watches them with a knowing look, commenting on how close they are and asking if they are sisters. "She's my girlfriend," Akari chirps happily, using the term in its most literal sense while Xiaoyu's brain completely short-circuits beside her. Monday arrives, and Xiaoyu is still wrapped in the warmth of that pink sweater, a dazed, happy smile on her face. By Tuesday, she hasn't taken it off, the soft fabric serving as a constant reminder of their date. Wednesday passes in a blur of bliss as she clings to the gift Akari gave her. By Thursday, her friends can't help but notice her obsession, teasing her about how much she clearly loves her new favorite outfit. Xuanzi is the heartthrob of the campus, a second-year student who radiates a cool aura wherever she goes. With a guitar strapped to her back and a gaze that could melt stone, she is every bit the handsome musician the girls swoon over. In the halls of the university, she is the pinnacle of popularity, a star that everyone wants to be near. But the moment the front door clicks shut, that icy exterior shatters into a million pieces as she clings to her girlfriend. "Jane, I'm home," she chirps, her voice losing all its edge as she wraps herself around her partner like a needy puppy. Their friend can only watch in disbelief, noting how Xuanzi becomes an entirely different person the second she steps into their shared sanctuary. Having a partner must be so nice, the friend sighs, clutching a pillow and imagining a world of constant romance. Xuanzi and Jane immediately shut that dream down with a synchronized wave of their hands, telling her she absolutely cannot join their little bubble. Curious about the spark that keeps them going after a year, the friend asks what it's really like to be a long-term couple. Jane looks thoughtful, admitting that, in the beginning, everything was a haze of awkwardness and trembling hands. They barely dared to look each other in the eye, let alone share the space they do now. But time has a way of eroding those barriers, turning shared baths and intimate kisses into something as natural as breathing. Xuanzi leans back, joking that now, sleeping next to Jane just feels like being curled up with a warm, comforting lump of pork belly. Their evenings have transformed into a quiet routine, often sitting back to back while lost in their own digital worlds. Silence fills the room, not a heavy or tense silence, but one born of complete and total comfort. Even in the bath, they are more likely to be checking their phones than whispering sweet nothings into each other's ears. To their friend, this looks like the death of romance, and she shouts that relationships seem boring as hell if this is the end game. Jane just smiles, remembering how they were once a whirlwind of passion that couldn't keep their hands off each other. Now, the passion has evolved into Jane reminding Xuanzi to pick up her clothes and asking what she wants for dinner. "Are you sure you're a couple?" the friend asks, squinting at the domestic scene. "Because from where I'm standing, you look more like a mother and her messy daughter." Jane ignores the jab, calmly explaining that dating isn't hard when you truly understand the person beside you. It's about the small things, the way you try to anticipate their needs before they even speak. They share a quiet moment over a snack, the air thick with a wholesome energy that radiates from their intertwined lives. The friend covers her eyes, groaning that the sheer wholesomeness of it all is enough to strike her blind. Xuanzi tries to steer the conversation back to romance, insisting that she is always showering Jane with presents. Jane raises an eyebrow, her expression skeptical as she asks exactly what presents she's talking about. With a wink and a finger heart, Xuanzi shamelessly declares that her gift is love. The response is immediate. Jane's hand connects with Xuanzi's cheek in a playful, yet firm, dismissal of her cheesiness. "You were looking for trouble," the friend laughs as Xuanzi pouts, nursing her injured face. Xuanzi plays it up, whining that it hurts and begging for sympathy, while Jane sighs at her antics. But Jane can't stay mad for long, leaning in to press a soft, apologetic kiss against the very spot she just swatted. The friend watches them, noticing how Jane's face is flushed a deep, telltale crimson from the sudden display of affection. As the friend prepares to head out for a bit, she leaves the two of them to their own devices. Xuanzi looks at Jane, realizing it has been far too long since they actually went out into the world together. "Let's go on a date today," Jane agrees, her eyes softening as she looks at her partner. They end up at the cafe downstairs, but the date quickly falls back into their comfortable, silent rhythm of scrolling through their phones. Xuanzi peers over the menu, asking if Jane wants anything to drink while she's up. Jane watches her, thinking that even though Xuanzi is younger and sometimes immature, she has moments of being a truly reliable adult. She feels a surge of warmth, realizing that being taken care of by this girl isn't a bad life at all. That sentiment is tested immediately when Xuanzi leans in with a sheepish grin and asks if Jane can pay for the drinks. Jane can only stare, realizing it might take a little longer for Xuanzi to fully grow up. Xuanzi takes a long, carefree gulp of her drink, completely oblivious to Jane's internal monologue. Jane looks at the cup, her mind wandering to the fact that sharing a straw is technically an indirect kiss. Xuanzi catches her gaze, leaning in close to whisper that it doesn't have to be be indirect if she doesn't want it to be. Suddenly, Xuanzi's expression turns solemn as she wonders aloud if their love will ever just disappear. Jane reaches out, her voice steady and full of promise as she tells her that as long as they are together, she will be happy every single day. They lean toward each other, the world fading away as they prepare to seal the promise with a kiss until a ka-cha sound breaks the tension. The friend is still there, phone out and grinning, as she captures the moment for her collection, leaving the couple to scream in unison. "Why are you still here?" Xia Heezy wipes the sweat from her brow, focusing intently on her work as a humble assistant at the local bakery. Despite her hard work, she can't help but sigh when an elderly customer calls out a sweet "thank you, son," a mistake that happens far too often because of her short, boyish hair. Even as she walks through the streets, girls whisper and blush behind their hands, captivated by the handsome stranger passing them by. "I'm not a guy," she wants to scream, her face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and frustration as she's nearly chased into the wrong restroom yet again. This confusion isn't new. Heezy and her best friend LZ have been inseparable since they were just children sharing toys. Even back then, LZ would cling to her arm with a determined look, declaring to the world that she wanted to marry Heezy when they grew up. Heezy could only look on with wide, startled eyes, her heart skipping a beat even at tender age. "But I'm a girl," she would think, a lone tear of confusion pricking at her eye as she struggled with her friend's innocent proposal. Heezy's gentle nature makes it impossible for her to say no to anyone, a trait that often leads her into trouble. So when LZ suddenly appears, waving a mysterious letter and begging for help, Heezy can't help but offer her full attention. She looks at her friend with a tentative, supportive smile, wondering what could have the idol so worked up. But the moment she reads the bold handwriting on the page, she nearly chokes, her face turning a shade of red that matches the heart on the envelope. Being a rising idol means LZ is constantly inundated with mountains of fan mail, but buried among the letters of adoration are darker, more extreme messages from a female fanatic that leave LZ feeling watched and vulnerable. Heezy's protective instincts flare up instantly, her brow furrowing as she suggests calling the police or contacting a manager to handle the threat. That's when LZ leans in, her eyes sparkling with a desperate plan as she pleads, "Please be my boyfriend." Heezy is left utterly stunned, her mind racing to process the inexplicable request. LZ explains the harrowing details. The fan sends unreasonable messages about her outfits, follows her after work, and lingers in the shadows. The feeling of being stalked has turned her life into a waking nightmare. "She doesn't even know that I hate purple," LZ exclaims, her fear manifesting as a bizarre outburst of frustration over the stalker's lack of true knowledge. Desperate for a sense of security, LZ turns to her friend Susu, asking if they can share a taxi home for the day. Susu agrees without hesitation, her expression turning grimly serious as she prepares to defend her friend. She reaches into her bag and produces a canister of pepper spray. But that is only the beginning of her arsenal. LZ watches in mounting horror as a heavy-duty lock and chain are pulled out next. "What do you usually carry in your bag?" LZ shrieks when a literal meat cleaver is brandished as the final line of defense. Back with Heezy, LZ argues that making it clear she has a boyfriend is the only way to make the obsessed fan finally give up. Heezy remains skeptical, wondering why she wasn't bypassed for someone more boyish or a kendo expert like their other friends. She watches LZ with a pained, silent expression, feeling a twinge of hurt that she might just be a convenient, random choice. But as LZ begins to reconsider the other girls, Heezy finds herself snapping with jealousy, shouting for her to stay and not go to anyone else. LZ realizes that Heezy is actually the perfect candidate. She has the height, the short hair, and a natural charm that doesn't require makeup. Without warning, LZ lunges forward, her hands reaching out to check Heezy's frame for the transformation. Heezy's heart hammers against her ribs, her breath hitching as her face erupts into a feverish blush from the sudden contact. "Okay, just making sure there's no need to bind your chest," LZ chirps, completely oblivious to the electric tension she's created. She looks Heezy over with a critical eye, deciding her usual clothes are far too reserved to part of a scary protector. With a mischievous grin, she pulls out a cool outfit borrowed from their friend Xuanzi. When Heezy finally steps out, wearing a choker and a daringly short top, she feels incredibly self-conscious. But LZ is absolutely floored, hiding her face behind her hands as she realizes just how dangerously handsome Heezy looks in the new style. Now they face a new dilemma. How are they supposed to actually convince the world they are a couple? LZ suggests that a kiss is the most common way to announce a relationship, sending a jolt of pure panic and excitement through the air. Heezy's voice trembles as she looks down at her friend, whispering that if it's LZ, she guesses she could do it. She leans in, her eyes squeezed shut in a mixture of nerves and longing, but she ends up aimlessly puckering her lips toward the empty air. In an effort to be the perfect boyfriend, Heezy begins to dote on LZ with unwavering devotion, constantly offering her water. She is incredibly attentive, even warning LZ to avoid cold drinks because her period is approaching. Heezy is ready to fulfill every need, offering to buy whatever treats LZ desires with a soft, caring smile. LZ stares at her phone, her heart racing as she realizes that Heezy isn't just acting, she's she's always been this incredibly kind. However, the weight of the lie begins to press down on LZ's conscience. She realizes that as an idol, she has a duty to remain devoted to her own principles and her fans. With a sudden burst of courage, she declares that she won't lie about her relationships and will face the fan herself. The air in the apartment was thick with a playful, yet stinging jealousy as Xuanzi effortlessly swept Jane off her feet, a scene of domestic bliss that felt like a mockery to the girl watching from the sidelines. Xiao Yu's heart sank as she clutched a pillow to her chest, her eyes brimming with a quiet, desperate envy as she whispered to herself that it must be nice to be so easily cherished. Akari, ever the observant model with eyes like cool mountain springs, leaned in with a smirk and asked if Xiao Yu wanted to experience that same fluttering sensation in her own chest. But the romantic dream shattered into an awkward reality when Akari attempted the lift, only for her knees to buckle as she let out a strained groan, leaving them both in a tangled, embarrassing heap. The rejection of her own body weight sent Xiao Yu spiraling into a dark pit of insecurity, leading her to huddle over the bathroom scale in the dead of night like a broken doll. Xuanzi tried to intervene, her voice soft with concern as she insisted that Xiao Yu was already the definition of petite and adorable. With tears fat and hot streaming down her face, Xiao Yu wailed that it didn't matter what Xuanzi thought, because Akari, the only one who mattered, simply couldn't carry her. Xuanzi tried to offer herself as a substitute, but the rejection was sharp. Xiao Yu didn't want a friend's comfort. She wanted the strength of the woman she admired, determined to transform herself into something lighter and more lovable. Xiao Yu watched Akari prepare for her rigorous morning routine, knowing the model spent every waking hour perfecting her form. "Akari, please let me follow you today," she pleaded, her eyes wide with a newfound, desperate resolve. The reality of a professional pace was a brutal wake-up call, as Akari glided forward like a gazelle while Xiao Yu's lungs began to scream for mercy. It only took a few minutes of that punishing speed before Akari turned around, her brow furrowing in sudden panic when she realized the trail behind her was empty. Back at the apartment, the atmosphere shifted from exercise to a medical emergency as Xiao Yu lay motionless on the sofa, her face pale and her breath shallow. Xuanzi demanded to know if the poor girl had collapsed from exhaustion, her heart hammering against her ribs at the sight of her friend's unconscious form. Akari's face flushed a deep, guilty crimson as she recalled the moment Xiao Yu gasped for air, prompting Akari to lean down for what she claimed was emergency CPR. But the truth was far more scandalous. It wasn't the run that killed Xiao Yu's consciousness, it was the electrifying touch of Akari's lips that sent her heart into a total meltdown. Once the chaos settled, Xuanzi tried to steer the ship back to sanity, gently suggesting that if weight was the issue, a balanced diet was far better than fainting in the streets. She whispered conspiratorially that Akari, being a world-class model, had secrets for staying slim that would make Xiao Yu's head spin. Xiao Yu's eyes sparkled with hope, her stomach rumbling at the thought of a delicious, life-changing meal prepared by her idol. Akari smiled softly, presenting a plate with a flourish, announcing that she had prepared a special extra portion just for her. The girl's heart plummeted through the floor when she looked down to find nothing but a mountain of cold, unseasoned green vegetables staring back at her. For a girl who identified as a hardcore carnivore, the sight was a tragedy. In her mind, she was a predator meant to feast on an entire ox, not graze like a rabbit. The torture intensified as she watched Xuanzi lovingly feed Jane a succulent, dripping piece of meat right in front of her tear-filled eyes. To make matters worse, Akari leaned in with a piece of fruit, her voice like honey as she urged Xiao Yu to just take a bite of the healthy alternative. Later that evening, as they lounged on the sofa, Xiao Yu looked at Xuanzi with genuine bewilderment, wondering how she stayed so fit without ever hitting the gym. Xuanzi's eyes darkened with a playful, sultry glint as she claimed her daily workout with Jane was more than enough to burn off any calories. Xiao Yu's imagination ran wild, picturing a scene of heated, breathless passion behind closed doors that left her blushing furiously. The illusion was shattered instantly when Xuanzi stood up and casually mentioned that the workout was actually just the grueling task of scrubbing the dinner dishes. Seeking a different kind of discipline, Xiao Yu hovered by the door the next day, asking if she could accompany Akari to her private kendo practice. Akari agreed with a gentle smile, though she warned that the only spare uniform she had was one she'd already worn and hadn't had the chance to wash yet. Xiao Yu clutched the heavy white fabric to her chest, her heart racing as she insisted it wasn't a problem at all. As she pulled the robes over her head, she was enveloped in the intoxicating, lingering scent of Akari's skin, feeling as though she were being held in a permanent, ghostly embrace. When Akari finally stepped onto the floor, she looked like a warrior queen, the kendo armor adding a sharp, dangerous edge to her ethereal beauty. The opponent stood ready, a silent figure behind a barred mask, waiting for the signal to begin the dance of blades. From the sidelines, Xiao Yu cheered with everything she had, her voice cracking as she screamed for Akari to defeat the mysterious challenger. But the world tilted on its axis when the masked figure pointed a wooden sword directly at her and declared that Xiao Yu was the one she wanted to fight. Dressed in the suffocatingly heavy protective gear, Xiao Yu felt like she was being crushed under the weight of her own ambitions. Akari stood before her, the wooden sword held with lethal grace, challenging the girl to finally come at her with everything she had. The confrontation lasted all of 3 seconds before the sheer weight of the armor sent Xiao Yu toppling forward, her balance betrayed by her own exhaustion. Akari caught her in an instant, their bodies pressing together through the thick padding, the heat between them rising faster than their heart rates. Days later, Xiao Yu stood on the scale again, her face a mask of pure despair as the numbers refused to budge from 43 kilograms. Akari walked in, her expression one of genuine confusion, as she asked why the girl was so obsessed with shedding weight she didn't have. With a trembling lip, Xiao Yu confessed that she thought she was the reason Akari had fallen during their attempt at a romantic carry. Akari's eyes widened in realization, her hand flying to her chest as she explained that the fall had nothing to do with weight, she had simply been nursing a twisted ankle. To prove her point, Akari reached down and scooped Xiao Yu up in one fluid, powerful motion, holding her as if she were as light as a summer breeze. I think girls are much cuter when they're a bit fuller anyway, Akari whispered, her gaze soft and full of an unspoken affection. Xiao Yu looked up at her, her golden eyes shimmering with tears of relief and a love so intense it felt like it might burst from her chest. But the emotional peak was short-lived, as the very next hour found Xiao Yu back on the couch, happily stuffing her face with a giant bag of potato chips. Jane sat hunched over the coffee table, her eyes scanning the lines of their monthly ledger with the intensity of a hawk. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple as she realized the numbers simply weren't adding up, her heart sinking with every calculated expense. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door broke her concentration, announcing a delivery that Jane definitely hadn't authorized. Xuanzi skipped toward the door with a guilty but excited grin, eagerly accepting a stack of boxes, while Jane's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury in the background. Even if you have your own spending money, this is getting out of hand, Jane barked, her voice cracking with the stress of their dwindling bank account. Xuanzi just puffed out her cheeks, arguing with a pout that shopping was simply an essential part of a woman's soul. She tried to justify it by pointing out how everyone has their weaknesses, like a child mesmerized by a giant, fluffy pink teddy bear, or even the most practical person being tempted by the sleek, silver allure of a brand new microwave. Look, I'll even give you this one. You'll love it, I promise. Xuanzi chirped, holding a box over her head like a peace offering. But Jane's expression remained grim as she dropped the bombshell that one of her writing columns had been axed, meaning their safety net was officially gone. Xuanzi froze, the matching t-shirt she'd bought for them suddenly feeling like heavy weights in her hands as the reality of Jane's stress hit her. Jane sighed, rubbing her temples while Xuanzi desperately tried to lighten the mood with a chic new purse. It wasn't until Xuanzi pulled out the exact Kindle Jane had been eyeing for months that the stern woman's resolve finally began to crumble, her hands flying to her face in a mix of exasperation and secret delight. Fine, Jane relented, her voice softening, but from now on we budget. If we can use half of something, we do it to save every penny. Xuanzi took the half rule a bit too literally, staring down at a plate that held a pitifully small portion of dinner. She carefully measured out a microscopic amount of laundry detergent, her eyes wide with the fear of overstepping the new household law. She even found herself hesitating in the bathroom, staring at a single square of toilet paper until Jane's voice drifted through the door, telling her she didn't need to be that extreme. Later that evening, Jane called out that dinner was ready, her voice echoing through their quiet apartment. Xuanzi poked her head around the corner, her stomach growling as she asked what culinary masterpiece her dear had whipped up on a budget. She felt a wave of guilt and affection, thinking about how Jane was still trying to provide excellent meals even when they were in a tight spot. However, her face fell when she saw the spread. Tomato and egg soup, scrambled eggs with tomatoes, sliced tomatoes, and fried eggs. It was a full-course meal of, well, just eggs and tomatoes. After the meal, Xuanzi sat at the table, her stomach still echoing with emptiness and her heart heavy with the need for something more. "Dear, come here for a second," Jane whispered, her eyes softening as she noticed Xuanzi's lingering dissatisfaction. Xuanzi didn't hesitate, reaching out to tenderly cup Jane's face, her thumbs brushing against those familiar cheeks. "What are you doing?" Jane asked, her breath hitching as Xuanzi leaned in close, whispering that she was simply satisfying a different kind of hunger, one that only affection could fill. But the guilt still gnawed at Xuanzi's insides. She knew she was the reason they were struggling, and she vowed to fix it. She pulled on a dark hoodie, lying through her teeth about new evening classes at the university, just so she could sneak out to work. Thanks to some old connections, she landed a job as a server at a high-end bar, confident that Jane would never set foot in such a place. Her heart nearly stopped when the door swung open and Jane walked in, looking professional and poised next to a man in a sharp suit. "I'm screwed," Xuanzi hissed, frantically grabbing at her hair as her manager barked at her to get back to work. In a moment of pure, panicked desperation, she grabbed a tiny masquerade mask, praying to the gods of drama that it would be enough of a disguise. She approached their table with a bottle of wine, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Jane took one look at the masked server and immediately deadpanned. "Xuanzi, what on earth are you doing here?" Xuanzi's cover was blown in seconds, and her jealousy flared white-hot as she demanded to know who the strange man was. "Wait, I know!" Swansea shouted, pointing an accusing finger at the bewildered man while Jane tried to shush her. Jane's face turned bright red from the spectacle, her hands trembling as she begged Swansea not to say anything stupid. "He's your dad, isn't he?" Swansea declared, her eyes wide with a sudden, hopeful realization. The man cleared his throat, introducing himself as an editor for a major magazine who was only there to discuss Jane's career. Jane leaned in close, her voice a sharp, low hiss as she told Swansea to go home before she caused an even bigger scene. Swansea huffed and turned away, pretending to leave, but she immediately dove behind a nearby sofa to eavesdrop on the conversation. She watched as the editor leaned in, his voice oily as he praised Jane's resume and her obvious capabilities. Then, Swansea's blood ran cold as the man's hand slid across the table, coming to rest firmly on Jane's hand in a clear, disgusting power play. "To pass the audit, Jane, you should already know what you have to do," he purred, his intentions turning dark and predatory. Jane looked down at his hand, her face pale and her lip trembling as the man laid out his conditions for her success. That was the final straw for Swansea, who let out a primal scream of "no" as she launched herself from her hiding spot. She stood between them, her eyes blazing with protective fire as she declared that she would work 10 jobs if she had to, just to keep Jane away from creeps like him. Jane stared up at her, her eyes shimmering with tears as she realized just how much Swansea was willing to sacrifice for her. They fell into a deep, desperate embrace, the world around them disappearing as they held onto each other for dear life. Meanwhile, the editor lay sprawled on the floor, knocked unconscious by Swansea's entrance, his dignity as shattered as the wine glass beside him. LZ peeks around the door, her voice bright as she asks her friends if they want to grab dinner together. Z, lounging on the couch, informs her that everyone is already out. Akari and Xiao Yu are pulling over time, while Swansea and Jane are off on a romantic date. LZ's shoulders slump slightly as she realizes they're the only ones left, worrying that a dinner for just 2 might be a bit pricey. Seeing her hesitation, Z offers to cook something for her instead, but LZ quickly decides that going out is the better option. As they walk through the chilly evening air, LZ shivers, muttering about how freezing it is while eyeing a couple nearby. Z notices her distress and asks if her hands are cold, his gaze soft and attentive. LZ's heart skips a beat as she looks up at him, her pulse quickening at the concern in his eyes. She wonders if this is the moment he'll finally reach out and take her hand, her breath hitching in anticipation. But instead of a romantic gesture, he simply tells her to put her own hands in her own pockets, leaving her feeling utterly deflated. She huffs, calling him a dummy and demanding to borrow his pockets instead, her pride stinging just a little. They walk in a heavy, awkward silence, the space between them feeling miles wide as they navigate the crowded street. LZ can't help but feel a pang of rejection, thinking that maybe he just doesn't want to hold her hand at all. Meanwhile, Z's internal monologue is a chaotic mess of blushing panic as she realizes she's actually holding hands with her favorite person inside her pocket. Looking back, Z was always the quiet one, an introverted child who clung to LZ as her only source of comfort. She was so shy that she refused to play with anyone else, keeping her world small and centered on her one true friend. Whenever LZ would join the other children to play, Hizai would stand in the shadows, watching with a heavy, silent heart. Seeing LZ hold hands with another little girl sent a sharp jolt of possessiveness through her young soul. She would stare intensely from behind corners, her eyes burning with a jealousy she didn't yet understand. Eventually, LZ would notice her and beckon her over, asking if she wanted to join in the fun. Hizai would light up instantly, building towers of blocks as long as she could be by LZ's side. Even when the other kids praised her drawings, her only focus remained on the girl who stood at the center of her universe. Deep down, she always wished the world would just fade away so it could be just the two of them forever. In the present day, Hizai is known for being a tall, handsome, and incredibly gentle soul. He carries himself with a quiet grace that draws eyes wherever he goes, though he remains oblivious to his own charm. He's the type to impulsively buy presents for his friends, though his intentions are often better than his execution. LZ can only watch in horror as he presents a bizarre, broccoli-shaped gift, realizing his tastes are unique, to say the least. The group gathers to celebrate Swansea's birthday, the birthday girl beaming as she thanks everyone for the wonderful day. Xiao Yu presents a massive, fluffy teddy bear, earning a bright smile of appreciation from the birthday girl. Akari follows up with a set of elegant bracelets, a perfectly thoughtful and stylish choice that fits Swansea perfectly. Then comes Hizai, who shyly offers a giant plush heart, prompting Swansea to joke that he should really be saving that for LZ. Swansea looks at the heart with a skeptical eye, telling him it's probably best if she doesn't take it. Hizai insists it's a gift for both her and Jane, claiming he picked it out specifically for the couple. He eagerly explains that there's a special mechanism inside, his eyes sparkling with misplaced pride as he prepares to demonstrate. With a sudden snap, the heart breaks into 2 jagged pieces, leaving Swansea completely speechless and utterly unimpressed. Later, LZ tries to give him some much-needed advice, explaining that these bizarre mechanical toys aren't the kind of gifts girls actually like. It needs to be something that warms the heart, she sighs, imagining something romantic and soft. Or at the very least, It should be something practical that shows he's been paying attention to her needs. Z tilts his head in confusion, holding up a lumpy hot water bag and asking if that counts as practical. LZ loses her temper, calling him a total idiot and telling him he'd be better off not giving presents at all. Seeing her anger, Z panics and tries to soothe her by wrapping a long, white scarf around her neck. LZ freezes, her breath catching as she wonders how he suddenly managed to do something surprisingly sweet. But the moment is ruined when he bluntly points out that the scarf is way too long and doesn't suit her at all. LZ stares at him, baffled as to why he would even buy it if he thought it looked bad on her. She tells him to squat down, her voice low and determined as she takes control of the situation. Zai looks up at her with wide, innocent eyes, completely unaware of the tension thickening between them. Suddenly, LZ loops the long ends of the scarf around his neck too, pulling their faces inches apart. The world seems to stop as they stare into each other's eyes, the warmth of their breath mingling in the cold air. A deep blush creeps up Z's neck as he realizes just how close she's pulled him. He stammers out her name, his heart racing against his ribs as the silence stretches on between them. Akari's effortless charm and striking looks made her the undisputed center of attention, a fact that never escaped those around her. Sipping her drink, Xiaoyu felt a cold knot of anxiety tighten in her chest, wondering what she would do if a girl even more captivating caught Akari's eye. She tried to soothe her racing heart, whispering to herself that Akari was straight and there was absolutely nothing to fear. But her fragile peace shattered the moment a sweet-faced girl approached, timidly asking Akari for a moment of her time in private. "Akari is mine," Xiaoyu fumed internally, her eyes narrowing as she watched the unexpected interloper move in. She hovered nearby, her mind a whirlwind of jealousy as she tried to convince herself they were just having a casual conversation. The air seemed to leave the room when the girl reached out, presenting Akari with a heart-shaped box of chocolates and a telltale envelope. Xiaoyu's world crumbled into a silent scream of despair, the sight of that love letter feeling like a physical blow to her heart. Just as she was about to spiral, a coworker interrupted her misery, asking why she was still lingering at the office like a lost soul. Desperate to reclaim her territory, Xiaoyu forced a smile and called out to Akari, suggesting they walk home together like they always did. The pink-haired girl didn't back down, her voice trembling with anticipation as she begged Akari for an answer to her feelings. Xiaoyu clung to her last shred of hope, certain that her straight-laced Akari would gently but firmly turn the girl away. "Sure," Akari replied with a serene smile, a single word that sent Xiaoyu's soul flying right out of her mouth in shock. Later that evening, Xiaoyu collapsed onto the couch, her spirit so broken that her friend Xuanzi could only stare in utter confusion. Tears welled in her eyes as she wailed about the confession, convinced that Akari had officially been snatched away by a total stranger. Xuanzi's eyes sharpened with protective fire, declaring that she would take matters into her own hands and confront Akari herself. "I can do that part myself," Xiaoyu squeaked, her face flushing as she realized how pathetic she must look. Xuanzi sighed, pointing out that they didn't actually know the contents of the letter and suggested a bit of light snooping to be sure. Xiaoyu hesitated, her moral compass spinning, but the sight of the pink envelope sitting mockingly on the bed was too much to resist. They hovered over the bed like conspirators, Xiaoyu trying to justify the intrusion as fate literally placing the evidence before them. As they read the words a slow, burning confession of long-held affection, Xiaoyu's face transformed into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Xuanzi pulled her into a comforting embrace, promising to stay by her side no matter how much of a romantic disaster this turned out to be. Suddenly, Akari appeared in the doorway, her expression bright as she mentioned a girlfriend had given her chocolates to share. Xiaoyu's jaw dropped, her heart sinking further as she realized Akari was actually planning to feed them the rival's love tokens. To make matters worse, Xuanzi popped a chocolate into her mouth, declaring it delicious while Xiaoyu screamed traitor in her mind. Xuanzi tried to play it cool, whispering that Akari was likely just being her usual oblivious self and didn't understand the girl's true intentions. Summoning every ounce of courage, Xiaoyu looked up from her despair and asked Akari what she truly thought of the girl, Xiaoya. Akari didn't miss a beat, listing off Xiaoya's charms and domestic skills with a warmth that made Xiaoyu feel like she was fading into gray. The blow was so devastating that Xiaoyu literally turned to stone, her very essence crumbling under the weight of Akari's praise for another. But then, Akari's voice softened as she asked Xiaoyu for restaurant recommendations, a small olive branch in the darkness. Like a parched plant receiving rain, Xiaoyu underwent an instant revival, her eyes sparkling with renewed hope and vigor. "She wants to go on a date with me." Xiaoyu cheered internally, her hands clenched in a victory pose as her imagination ran wild. Her joy was short-lived, however, as Akari looked down at her phone, her smile widening as she prepared to coordinate with the enemy. On the screen, the messages between Akari and Xiaoya were filled with mutual excitement, planning a meeting that looked suspiciously romantic. Akari looked like a girl in love as she typed away, her blue eyes reflecting the soft glow of the screen. The final message from Xiaoya was the killing blow, calling their upcoming weekend meeting their very official date. Back in her own room, Xiaoya hugged her pillow and giggled, her heart fluttering at the thought of finally winning Kari over. The next morning, Xiaoyu arrived at school looking like she had crawled out of a grave, her eyes dark and her spirit drained. Her friend Z recoiled in shock, demanding to know if she had spent the entire night haunting the hallways instead of sleeping. Xiao Yu could only groan in response, her misery so thick it was practically a physical fog surrounding her tired frame. Z pointed a firm finger at her, warning that if she didn't confess her feelings soon, she would spend the rest of her life in regret. Xiao Yu's other friend joined in, reminding her that she had the advantage of years spent living under the same roof as Akari. A spark of competitive fire finally ignited in Xiao Yu's eyes as she realized she wouldn't let anyone take her place by Akari's side without a fight. She marched up to Akari later that day, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to demand the truth. With a trembling voice, she asked if Akari was still planning to head out with Xiao Ye, her eyes searching for any sign of betrayal. Akari looked up, her expression calm and innocent, as she explained that she had decided to stay home instead of going out. For a fleeting moment, the sun seemed to shine again for Xiao Yu, her face lighting up with a dazzling, hopeful smile. She threw her hands up in a cheer, declaring she was completely free to spend the entire day by Akari's side, only for Akari to reveal that she'd invited Xiao Ya over so they could all play together. Recently, the atmosphere at the office had shifted entirely with the arrival of a new recruit named Xiao Ya, whose presence seemed to radiate a constant, shimmering light. She was the definition of pretty and sweet, always leaning in with a soft smile to ask for guidance, making it impossible for anyone to turn her down. But for Xiao Yu, those sweet smiles felt like a declaration of war, especially after she learned the devastating truth. Xiao Ya had actually confessed her feelings to Akari. The thought of this beautiful newcomer encroaching on her territory sent Xiao Yu into a spiral of jealousy, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the rival was coming over to their house today. Desperate to protect what was hers, Xiao Yu cornered her friends, begging them to help her stage a show of force that would scare the girl away. Her friends looked at her with pure exhaustion, wondering how they were supposed to help with such a ridiculous request. Fine, if we're doing this, we start with the classics, they sighed, slipping on dark sunglasses to look like high-stakes enforcers. Before long, they were fully committed to the bit, standing tall in black tuxedos like they were guarding the entrance to a secret underground club. Xiao Yu watched them, her eyes narrowing as she muttered that it would be even better if they had some weapons to really sell the mafia vibe. The doorbell rang, and there stood Xiao Ya, looking like a literal angel in her school uniform, her voice chirping a polite greeting. The bodyguards stepped forward, trying to look as menacing as possible as they demanded to know who she was looking for. From the other room, Akari's head snapped toward the door at the sound of the commotion, her brow furrowing in total confusion. But the intimidation lasted all of 5 seconds before the two tough guys completely folded, blushing as they realized Xiao Ye was a fan of rock music just like them. Traitors! Xiao Yu hissed from the shadows as Akari pushed past the idiots to welcome their guest inside. Xiao Ye stepped into the entryway, her curious eyes darting around until they landed on Akari, asking if she and Xiao Yu shared a room. Akari didn't miss a beat, casually explaining that they lived together, though she usually took the couch while Xiao Yu claimed the bed. Xiao Yu's face went bright red as she shrieked at Akari to stop oversharing, her heart doing backflips from the embarrassment. As Xiao Ye peered into their shared closet, the intimacy of their lives laid bare, she asked if they always kept their belongings so closely intertwined. Xiao Yu puffed out her chest, trying to reclaim some dominance by bragging that their relationship was anything but ordinary. But Akari just laughed, pointing out that their things only got mixed up because Xiao Yu was a walking disaster who couldn't keep her side tidy. Xiao Ya's expression softened into something unreadable as she asked Akari if she'd ever actually consider moving out of the Lily apartment. Akari paused, the silence stretching thin as she touched her chin in deep thought, making Xiao Yu's breath hitch in her throat. Xiao Yu felt like her world was ending, her eyes welling with tears as she silently pleaded for Akari not to leave her behind. Moving is just such a pain, Akari finally groaned, citing the hassle of packing and the difficulty of finding a good location as her primary reasons for staying. With the crisis averted for the moment, they moved to the living room, though the tension still hung heavy in the air. Akari played the perfect host, leaning forward with a warm smile to ask Xiao Ya how she was adjusting to life at the company. Xiao Ya looked down, her voice trembling slightly as she admitted that everyone was kind but Xiao Yu. Well, Xiao Yu was a special case. Sensing a threat, Xiao Yu wedged herself firmly between the two of them on the couch, creating a literal safe distance to keep them apart. When Akari announced she was going to head into the kitchen to whip up some lunch, Xiao Ya immediately offered to help. Xiao Yu jumped up like she'd been struck by lightning, insisting that a guest shouldn't have to work, and that she would be the one helping in the kitchen instead. She gave a triumphant little smirk, thinking she'd finally won a round by separating the two of them. Akari just gave them a cheerful wave, telling the two girls she was relying on them to get the meal started. Xiao Yu stood at the counter, her mind racing with a competitive fire as she told herself that even if Xiao Yao was cuter and more social, she couldn't possibly win in a cooking battle. But the moment Xiao Ya picked up a knife, the atmosphere changed. She moved with the grace of a professional chef, her blades a blur of precision. Xiao Yu watched in horror as Xiao Ya hummed a little tune, looking like a literal goddess of the kitchen while she effortlessly prepared the ingredients. When the dishes were finally finished, the difference was soul-crushing. Xiao Ye's plate was a work of art, while Xiao Yu's looked like a burned offering. In her state of distracted shock, Xiao Yu's hand slipped, the sharp edge of the knife catching the tip of her finger. Xiao Yu let out a gasp of genuine concern, rushing over to check on the wound while Xiao Yu tried to play it off as nothing. Without a word, Xiao Yu took Xiao Yu's hand, lifting the injured finger to her lips to gently tend to it in a moment of shocking intimacy. Xiao Yu froze, her heart thundering so loudly she was sure the whole room could hear it as the heat to her face. When they finally sat down to eat, the friends were absolutely blown away by the quality of the meal, showering Xiao Yu with praise. Akari smiled brightly, mentioning how impressive it was that Xiao Yu had even found the time to teach Xiao Yu a few things in the kitchen. Xiao Yu slumped in her seat, feeling completely defeated and convinced that Akari must be falling for this perfect girl. But then, Akari tilted her head and dropped a bombshell that shattered Xiao Yu's entire reality. But the one Xiao Yu actually likes is you, Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu's jaw dropped as she let out a strangled eh? Her brain struggling to process the sudden reversal. Xiao Yu turned a deep shade of crimson, hiding her face as she scolded Akari for revealing the secret she had promised to keep. Akari just laughed, leaning back and teasing that it was perfectly normal to fall for someone as undeniably cute as their Xiao Yu. Finding her courage at last, Xiao Yu looked up with shimmering eyes and asked if Xiao Yu would go on a date with her that afternoon. The sheer intensity of the moment was too much for Xiao Yu's heart to handle, and she let out a panicked scream before bolting out of the house at full speed. A date between two people should be a time of pure, unadulterated happiness, a chance for hearts to beat in sync under the soft glow of romance. It's supposed to be about the simple joys like the thrill of finding that perfect outfit while buying clothes together. It's about the lingering sweetness of eating good food, sharing flavors and laughter in equal measure. But as Xiao Yu stands there, the weight of the moment feels less like a dream and more like a confusing obligation. Her mind screaming, "Why am I here with you?" She tries to organize her chaotic thoughts, remembering how this all started when she saw Xiao Yu seemingly confessing her feelings to Akari. Then, everything blurred together as Xiao Yu began appearing as a guest, weaving herself into the fabric of their daily lives. The world truly turned upside down when Akari dropped the bombshell, nonchalantly claiming that the one Xiao Yu actually likes is Xiao Yu herself. Xiao Yu clutches her head in a daze, her pulse racing as she wonders how on earth things could have turned out like this. Beside her, Xiao Yu is a vision of prettiness and charm, her personality seemingly flawless to any outside observer. Yet, as Xiao Yu looks at her, there is a cold void where a spark should be, and she realizes she simply doesn't feel anything towards the girl. She takes a shaky breath, steeling her resolve, because she knows she has to find a chance to talk to her and make her feelings crystal clear. But before she can speak, Xiao Yu excitedly holds up her phone, announcing she's already bought movie tickets and has a whole evening of sweets planned out. Xiao Yu's courage fails her in the face of such relentless energy, and she can only offer a weak, hesitant "oh okay," as her inner voice berates her for being so spineless. At the theater, the smell of buttered popcorn fills the air, and Xiao Yu tries to salvage the mood by asking what they're going to watch. Xiao Yu beams with a mischievous glint in her eye, handing over a ticket and promising that she's picked out something truly stimulating. Xiao Yu's heart skips a beat, her face heating up as her mind wanders to what stimulating could possibly mean in this context. The reality, however, is a freezing bucket of water over her head. The stimulating feature is actually a dry documentary titled The History of Tomb Raiders. As the narrator drones on about ancient ruins, Xiao Yu sits in the dark, thinking that even if she'd never seen a documentary in a theater before, she would have vastly preferred literally anything else. On screen, the history of Tang Dynasty tombs and bricklaying techniques unfolds with agonizing detail, a far cry from the romance she was bracing for. Xiao Yu leans in, her eyes wide with genuine fascination as she whispers to ask if Xiao Yu finds the history as interesting as she does. She receives no answer, because Xiao Yu has completely surrendered to the boredom, her head lolling back as she falls into a deep, unceremonious sleep. When the lights finally come up, Xiao Yu wakes with a start, rubbing her neck and offering a sheepish apology for her accidental nap. Xiao Yu just giggles, brushing it off with a smile while immediately dragging her toward the exit to find something to drink. Xiao Yu tries to assert herself for once, softly requesting a sweet, comforting cappuccino to wake her up. But Xiao Yu isn't even listening, raising a finger to the barista and ordering 2 bitter Americanos instead, completely ignoring her date's preference. Sitting at the cafe, Xiao Yu rests her cheek on her hand, her eyes shining as she confesses how happy she is to finally be on this date. Xiao Yu looks down at her cup, her expression tight and forced as she mutters that she's glad if Xiao Yu is happy. She takes a sip of the dark, punishing liquid, her nose wrinkling as the bitterness coats her tongue. In that moment, a wave of longing hits her, remembering how Akari always knew she hated bitter things, and would have ordered a cappuccino without even being asked. Far away from the awkward date, Akari suddenly lets out a sharp sneeze, the sudden chill making her pause mid-sentence. Her companion looks over with a knowing smirk, asking if she's feeling sick, or if perhaps her heart is racing for another reason. Akari looks away, her finger tracing her lip as she admits that she's just a little bit worried about how Xiao Yu is faring. The redhead laughs, telling her it's perfectly fine to be worried, and that she should finally start listening to the voice in her heart. Akari blinks, the realization of her own protective nature hitting her as she holds a small box tightly in her hands. Her friend leans in closer, teasingly asking if Akari is actually terrified that Xiao Yu might end up liking someone else. Akari's eyes go wide, the thought of Xiao Yu belonging to another person sending a strange, uncomfortable jolt through her system. She goes quiet for a long moment before whispering a question that leaves her friend speechless. Do you think it would be too cramped if the three of us lived together? Back on the street, the sun is beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows over the two girls as their date comes to an end. Xiaoya turns to Xiao Yu, her voice soft and full of hope, as she thanks her for the most wonderful day of her life. Xiao Yu looks at her, the guilt gnawing at her chest, but she knows she can't let this lie continue any longer. With a heavy heart and a steady voice, she finally says the words, "I'm sorry, Xiaoya, but I already have someone that I like." Xiao Ye's world seems to shatter in an instant, her eyes trembling as she whispers, "You mean Akari, right?" She tries to fight back, her voice rising in desperation as she points out that Akari isn't even interested in girls. Xiao Yu just gives a sad, beautiful smile, looking toward the horizon as she replies that it's her own problem to deal with, and it doesn't change how she feels. With a final, polite bow, she tells Xiaoya she's leaving, walking away from the girl who could never truly see her. She arrives home to find the apartment filled with the familiar, comforting scent of tea and the teasing voice of her roommate. The redhead grills her immediately, asking if the date was a total disaster or a secret success. But the room goes silent as Akari steps forward, holding a tray of tea, her blue eyes searching Xiao Yu's face with an intensity that makes her breath hitch. "Xiao Yu," Akari asks softly, the air between them thick with unspoken tension, "do you like girls?" Jane's peaceful afternoon is shattered the moment her phone begins to vibrate aggressively on her desk. She answers with a weary sigh, only to be met by her mother's voice launching into a relentless interrogation about why she's still single, and if she's ever coming home. The pressure is suffocating, with her mother comparing her to the neighbor's sons while Jane feels the stress-induced sweat start to beat on her forehead. Desperate to end the lecture and return to her work, Jane blurts out a massive lie. She tells her mother she finally has a boyfriend. She breathes a momentary sigh of relief, thinking she's bought herself another year of freedom by claiming her partner is far away in Shanghai. But the phone vibrates again almost instantly, sending a cold shiver running down her spine. Her mother's voice returns, sickeningly sweet, as she says Jane won't have to worry about traveling home this Christmas. The trap snaps shut when her mother reveals the terrifying news. They've already bought plane tickets to come see this mysterious boyfriend in person tomorrow. Meanwhile, in the other room, Hizai and Swanzi are lost in their own world, blissfully unaware of the storm heading their way. LZ joins them, suggesting they just have a quiet Christmas at home to avoid the suffocating holiday crowds. Swanzi teases Hizai about the gift she's prepared for LZ, and Hizai shyly admits she's knitted a simple beanie. Swanzi laughs, warning her friend that such a modest gift might not be enough to satisfy LZ's expectations. Her mood quickly shifts to pure, giddy excitement as she dreams of her upcoming Disney date with her beloved Jane. Her face flushes a deep, beautiful crimson as she wonders what romantic surprise her dear has meticulously prepared for her this year. The door bursts open as Jane stumbles into the room, her eyes wide with sheer panic. Without a word of explanation, she lunges forward and grabs LZ, begging to borrow Hizai for the holiday. Jane quickly explains the nightmare scenario. Her parents are arriving tomorrow, and Hizai is the only one who can convincingly play the part of the perfect boyfriend. Swanzi's jaw drops in shock, her heart aching with a sudden pang of jealousy as she argues that she should be the one at Jane's side. Jane shoots her down immediately, pointing out that Swanzi's piercings and rebellious look would never fly with her conservative parents, unlike Hizai's upright and proper appearance. LZ can't help but agreeing that Hizai really does possess the look of an ideal, honest son-in-law. LZ's eyes narrow slightly, wondering if Hizai is actually capable of pulling off such a high-stakes performance. Hizai, always the helpful friend, agrees to the charade despite the obvious awkwardness of the plan. Swanzi continues to protest, her voice rising in a desperate plea to not be replaced in Jane's public life. But LZ is actually curious now, stating she wants to see exactly how Hizai will act when she's forced to play the role of a boyfriend. Jane tries to focus on the logistics, insisting they all need to scrub the apartment clean before the parents arrive. Swanzi slumps against the wall, muttering a litany of insecurities about her hair and her height, wondering if she should just change everything about herself. Her babbling turns into a full-blown pout, convinced that Jane is on the verge of falling out of love with her cute girlfriend. Jane pinches the bridge of her nose, finding the dramatic display both exhausting and incredibly annoying. Softening her gaze, Jane reaches out to gently stroke Swanzi's hair, whispering for her to just endure this temporary lie for her sake. She leans in close, her voice dropping to a seductive murmur as she promises a very special, private present once the parents are gone. Swanzi's eyes sparkle with renewed hope, the jealousy momentarily forgotten in the heat of Jane's promise. From the doorway, LZ and Hizai watch the intimate moment, deciding it's best to leave the lovers to their reconciliation. Jane rounds them up, directing the team to start organizing the other rooms to hide any traces of their actual lives. LZ lets out a heavy sigh as she carries a heavy box, while Hizai worries that Swanzi is just going to find find a way to slack off. 15 minutes into the cleaning frenzy, Jane checks in to see how the progress is coming along. She finds the trio huddled together in the middle of the room, staring intensely at a box they've pulled from the shadows. Xuanzai explains she found the hidden stash while sweeping deep under the bed, thinking it was trash from a previous tenant. LZ holds the container, her face turning pale as she realizes it's Xiao Yu's secret collection of Akari's personal belongings. The contents are shockingly intimate, ranging from heartfelt love letters to actual necklaces and even stolen panties. A heavy, awkward silence falls over them as LZ decides the only course of action is to pretend they never saw this dark secret. Somewhere else, Akari lets out a sudden sneeze, rubbing her nose and wondering if people are gossiping about her behind her back. As the sun sets, Jane finally feels like the apartment is ready for the parental inspection. She turns to Hezi, offering a sincere apology for dragging her into this complicated family mess. Jane reminds her one last time to be ready to act her heart out starting tomorrow morning. With a final, weary look and a heavy sigh, Jane retreats to her room to prepare for the ordeal ahead. Later that night, the house is quiet, but the tension in the bedroom is thick and heavy. Xuanzai stares at the ceiling, her voice trembling with vulnerability, as she asks if things would be easier if she had been born a man. Jane turns to her, her eyes filled with a soft, unwavering devotion as she listens to her girlfriend's fears. The web of lies was spinning faster than Jane could keep up with, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at her phone in a cold sweat. Her parents were officially in Shanghai for Christmas, all because she'd made the impulsive mistake of claiming she finally had a boyfriend. Beside her, the cool and collected Hezi offered a small, teasing smile, completely unfazed by the fact that she was about to play the role of the man in this domestic drama. But Xuanzi wasn't taking the news nearly as well, her face a mask of forced maturity as she claimed she wasn't jealous in the slightest. However, the way her knuckles whitened as she gripped a baseball bat behind her back told a much more violent, possessive story. Jane turned back toward the door, her voice trembling as she asked Hezi to help her fetch the luggage from the entrance. Hezi hesitated, realizing the living room was still a disaster zone, so Jane made a split-second executive decision to take Xuanzi instead, labeling her the roommate to keep the peace. "We're just going down to get them, it's nothing much," Jane whispered, trying to soothe the fire in Xuanzi's eyes. But the tension snapped into comedy when Jane looked down and realized her roommate was standing there in nothing but a sweater and a pair of loud, patterned boxers. Once they finally made it to the elevator, Xuanzi's bravado vanished, replaced by a frantic panic over whether she should address the parents as uncle and aunt, or something more formal. The doors slid open to reveal Jane's father, a man who looked every bit as stern and imposing as a high court judge. Xuanzi froze, her breath hitching as she took in their serious expressions, feeling like a criminal caught in the act. "Dad," Jane cried out, trying to break the suffocating silence that had fallen over the small space. Xuanzi scrambled to be helpful, bowing so low she nearly hit the floor as she babbled an apology about his height. As they moved toward the apartment, Jane's mother watched them with a piercing gaze, noting how easily Xuanzi handled the heavy suitcases. The father, clearly impressed by the display of strength, let out a booming laugh and clapped a hand onto Xuanzi's shoulder. "Great! It seems my son-in-law is quite capable," he declared, sending a jolt of pure electricity through both girls. "Dad, Xuanzi is a girl," Jane screamed, her face erupting into a brilliant, mortified shade of crimson. The father blinked, his eyes widening behind his glasses as he took a closer look at the long hair and delicate features he'd completely ignored. Jane huffed, crossing her arms and snapping at him to actually look at who he was talking to before making assumptions. Xuanzi tried to smooth things over with a shaky laugh, leaning into the father's space to show there were no hard feelings. But the peace was short-lived as the father immediately pivoted to trying to set Xuanzi up with his nephew, much to Jane's mounting fury. That was when the dragon herself, Jane's mother, stepped forward with her arms crossed, demanding to see the snothead who was supposedly dating her daughter. Hezi stepped into the light, radiating a charming, sparkling energy as she introduced herself as Jiao Xia. They settled onto the sofa, the air thick with the scent of a brewing interrogation as the mother leaned in close. The father leaned toward Jane, whispering that her mother seemed to be handling the boyfriend better than expected. Hezi began her rehearsed speech about working at a bakery, her voice smooth and convincing, but the mother's eyes narrowed into slits, a sharp weight, cutting through the air like a blade. Before anyone could react, the mother reached out and grabbed Hezi's chest, causing the poor girl to let out a strangled gasp of pure terror. "Sweetie, your chest hasn't got any strength in it." The mother sighed, completely oblivious to the fact that she was feeling up a woman. The mother then stood up, declaring she wanted to see the room Hezi shared with her roommate. Sensing the danger, Xuanzi lunged forward, wrapping her arms around Hezi in a sudden, desperate back hug. "I also want to see how strong your chest is," Xuanzi growled into Hezi's ear, her voice low and dripping with a dangerous, jealous heat. The mother marched into the bedroom, her face contorting in disgust at the messy state of the sanctuary. She began a relentless lecture about hanging up clothes, her voice echoing off the walls as Jane and Swansea peeked nervously through the doorway. The mother reached for the curtains, complaining about how stuffy the room felt, only for Jane to quickly lie about a broken window. Swansea forced a strained, awkward smile, praying the woman wouldn't notice the frantic beating of her heart. Back in the living room, the mother questioned if Hizai and Jane had trouble communicating due to their age gap. The father waved her off, leaning back with a grin and insisting that being young was a blessing. He launched into a speech about them being independent adults, who didn't need to rely on their parents for anything. He turned his gaze towards Swansea, who could only nod like a bobblehead while sweat poured down her neck. "I'll go get everyone some water," Swansea squeaked, practically bolting toward the kitchen to escape the suffocating atmosphere. The father watched her go, a wistful smile on his face as he remarked that if she were a boy, he'd give her Jane's hand in marriage in a heartbeat. The mother snapped at him to watch his mouth, pointing out that Jane's boyfriend was sitting right there. Swansea froze in the doorway, the tray of glasses rattling in her hands as she realized just how deep this hole was getting. As evening fell, Jane suggested her parents head hotel, but the mother wasn't having it. She insisted they stay the night, her eyes fixed on Jane with a look that promised a very long, very detailed conversation. The father nodded in agreement, suggesting that Jane and her mother share a room to catch up on their nagging. Then, with a terrifyingly friendly grin, he grabbed Hizi's shoulder, declaring that us two hunks would be sleeping together in the other room. The air was thick with the scent of a holiday miracle as Jane and Swansea shared a radiant smile, clutching hands in pure relief that they wouldn't be parted this Christmas. But that fragile bubble of happiness burst the moment Jane stared at her phone in a cold sweat, realizing her parents were descending upon Shanghai like a localized storm. Hizi had played the part of the perfect, charming boyfriend with effortless grace, offering a friendly wave that could win over any mother-in-law. However, the plot took a sharp, terrifying turn when Jane's father dropped a bombshell. He wanted to share a room with Hizi for the night. "Us two men can sleep in the same room tonight," the father declared with a paternal smile, completely unaware of the minefield he was stepping into. LZ couldn't contain her panic for a second longer, lunging forward with a desperate scream that they absolutely could not do that. A deafening, suffocating silence fell over the group as everyone froze, their hearts hammering against their ribs in the sudden tension. Thinking fast, LZ stammered out a ridiculous excuse about Jane's room being more soundproof for the guests, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Jane tried to step in with a forced, shaky smile, suggesting that it would simply be too awkward for Hizai to sleep with a virtual stranger. Her father rubbed the back of his neck in defeat, though his eyes remained clouded with a lingering, uncomfortable confusion. Jane's mother stood by with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze cutting through the lies as she sensed the mounting desperation in the room. "What do you want?" The mother finally snapped, her patience wearing thin as she stared down her husband's suspicious behavior. Later, Jane leaned in close to Hizi, her voice a soft, apologetic whisper as she warned him about her father's overprotective streak. Hizi just smiled warmly, his eyes softening as he reached out to comfort her, understanding that their strictness only came from a place of deep love. Jane looked at him with a mix of guilt and affection, asking if he could really bear the weight of this complicated charade for one more night. Suddenly, the bedroom door flew open as Swansea and LZ peeked in with wide, frantic eyes, their jealousy nearly boiling over. "How could you sleep with someone else?" Swansea wailed in her mind, her face contorting into a mask of dramatic betrayal. She became a whirlwind of frantic energy, clenching her fists and declaring that she had no choice but to take drastic measures. Swansea's eyes went wide with shock as she tried to process the chaotic energy radiating from her friend. In a display of pure, unadulterated desperation, Shuai dropped to her knees and begged for mercy, her voice cracking with emotion. Meanwhile, tucked away in their guest room, Jane's mother sat bolt upright in bed, her intuition screaming that something was fundamentally off about the happy couple. Her husband tried to soothe her, reading his paper and insisting that Hizi seemed like a perfectly well-mannered young man. But the mother wasn't buying it, resting her head on her hand as she pointed out that Jane and her boyfriend didn't seem close at all. Sensing a brewing storm, the father decided he couldn't just sit there. He had to go and investigate the truth for himself. He crept through the hallway, his heart heavy with the fear that his daughter was trapped in a loveless or argumentative relationship. Peering through the crack in the door, his eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw Jane looking solemn and apologetic toward Hizi. Then, the scene shifted into something he couldn't have imagined. Xuanzi appeared, looking like a tearful third wheel in a tragic romance. The father's brain short-circuited as he watched LZ join the fray, thinking to himself in horror that Hizi was juggling 3 women at once. He stepped back, a look of profound, bewildered respect crossing his face as he muttered that Hizi was truly impressive. Jane whirled around, her heart stopping as she caught her father spying on their chaotic living arrangement. He pointed a trembling finger at the sleeping bag on the floor, his voice shaking as he demanded to know the meaning of this setup. The entire group stood in a line of guilty silence, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife as they waited for the hammer to fall. So it really is a 4-person relationship, the father thought, his mind spiraling into a world of modern romance he didn't understand. The interrogation began with a simple question about when they met, But the air turned icy as two completely different answers slipped out at once. When asked how they got to know each other, the lies tangled further, with one claiming a cafe and the other claiming the apartment. The final blow came when he asked who confessed first, resulting in Jane and Hee pointing at each other in perfect, disastrous synchronization. They both looked away in a fit of blushing embarrassment, the silence that followed being the loudest thing in the room. Surprisingly, the father's expression softened into one of weary acceptance, stating that as long as his daughter was happy, he would try to understand. He placed a heavy, meaningful hand on Hee's shoulder, telling the young man that it was up to him to sort out this complicated web of hearts. Jane watched from the sidelines, her mouth agape as her father gave a man-to-man blessing to a situation that didn't even exist. "You must pay careful attention to all of their feelings," the father whispered solemnly, treating Hee like the protagonist of a harem drama. The next morning, Jane stood by the door, waving a final relieved goodbye to her parents as they finally made their exit. Once the coast was clear, Jane leaned into Swanzi's ear, her voice a playful whisper as she told her to go find the secret present she'd left behind. Swanzi's eyes lit up with pure, childish joy as she spotted a beautifully wrapped box sitting on the table. She let out a squeal of delight, holding up a tiny, adorable teddy bear keychain and marveling at how cute Jane had become. Swanzi rushed to Jane's side to thank her, her face glowing with the warmth of a successful holiday surprise. However, Jane looked back at the table with a confused tilt of her head, wondering why Swanzi thought a box of chocolates was cute. Swanzi just beamed, lost in her own world of affection, while Jane remained blissfully unaware of the gift swap confusion. Meanwhile, Hee stood in the middle of the room with a look of utter bewilderment, staring at the empty space where the present he bought was supposed to be. Jane's parents are finally heading out, leaving a trail of warm wishes behind them as the holiday season winds down. Swanzi couldn't help but beam, clutching the adorable little bear keychain that Jane had picked out just for her. For a moment, the world felt perfect, a picture of health romance where everyone was living their best life. Well, everyone except for a very distressed Hee, who was currently peering over the furniture with a look of pure panic on her face. Just a few days earlier, Hee was stuck in a loop of indecision, her mind racing as she wondered what on earth Elzai would actually want for Christmas. She overheard a couple of girls gossiping nearby, one of them showing off a fluffy little bunny and calling it the height of cuteness. Even though the other girl scoffed and called it childish, the first girl insisted that these charms were the trendiest accessories of the season. The idea took root in Hee's mind. Maybe a keychain was exactly the kind of thoughtful, personal touch she needed. She set out with the best of intentions, her eyes scanning the aisles for that one perfect token of affection. "Let's see." Azzy is always losing her hairbands, and she's so reckless with her earbuds, she murmured to herself, trying to be practical. But as she started grabbing storage boxes, lanyards, and even nail clippers, her shopping basket began to look more like a hardware store haul than a romantic gesture. She stopped dead in her tracks, blinking at the pile of random household goods and wondering how she had gotten so off track. That's when she saw them, the soft, plush bears dangling from the rack in a variety of sweet colors. She hesitated, her cheeks flushing as she worried that such a feminine, dainty gift might not suit her cool image at all. Taking a deep breath, she reached out her hand to claim one of the bears, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. But just as her fingers grazed the soft fur, another hand reached out at the exact same moment, causing them both to jump. Her eyes widened in shock as she realized she was staring right at Su LZ's fellow idol group member. Su was just as surprised, wondering why someone who lived so far away was shopping in this specific neighborhood. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward, as Susu's gaze drifted down to the tiny bear between them. A knowing smirk played on Susu's lips as she teased, "Oh, is this a little something for LZ?" Hee's face went completely red as she dropped into a desperate bow, pleading with Su to keep this embarrassing secret to herself. Despite the humiliation, Hee eventually walked away with the gift, though she couldn't help but feel a bit silly for being so nervous. Back at the apartment, Xuanzi caught her coming in and immediately started prying into what was inside the shopping bag. Hee shifted uncomfortably, finally admitting that she needed help, because Swanzi clearly had more experience with this romantic stuff. But before they could get into a real strategy session, Jane's voice rang out, calling Swanzi away and leaving Hee alone with her doubts. Once the big day had passed, Hee found herself scrolling through her phone, paralyzed by the fear that her gift had been a total flop. Nearby, Xuanzi was practically glowing, boasting about how Jane finally showed some taste with her super cute Christmas present. She even started complaining about how bossy Jane could be, unaware that the woman in question was standing right behind her with a terrifyingly calm expression. Hee watched the scene unfold with a cold sweat, reminding herself that she really needed to be more careful with her own words. Finally, she couldn't take the suspense anymore, and decided it was time to clear the air with LZ once and for all. She approached her with a trembling heart, her voice barely a whisper as she asked, "LZ, do you like?" LZ blinked, caught off guard by the sudden intensity in Hee's eyes as the tension in the room spiked. "The present I gave you." Hezi blurted out, her hands fidgeting as she waited for a verdict that felt like life or death. In Hezi's mind, she was picturing the adorable little bear she had agonized over. But LZ's thoughts were miles away, focused on a plain, somewhat drab green beanie she had received. Hezi leaned in, her voice soft and earnest as she begged LZ to treasure it and keep it by her side forever. LZ looked absolutely horrified, imagining a future where she was forced to wear that unstylish green hat every single day. She stared down at the beanie, her heart aching because she knew how much effort Hezi must have put into choosing it. I've gotten used to her weird gifts, she sighed internally, wishing just once for something that actually fit her style. But because she cared, she pulled the beanie over her head, feeling utterly ridiculous as she adjusted it. Suddenly, the door swung open and Su walked in, stopping dead in her tracks at the sight. Su couldn't help but laugh, asking why on earth LZ was wearing such a strange accessory indoors. To LZ's surprise, Su reached into her bag and pulled out a cute bear keychain, offering it as a spontaneous gift. LZ tried to decline, insisting she could just buy one herself, but Su wouldn't take no for an answer. With a playful wink, Su clipped the charm onto LZ's bag, declaring that now they had matching accessories. Just as Su left, Hezi walked into the room and froze, her eyes landing directly on the blue bear dangling from the bag. LZ turned around with a bright, genuine smile, excitedly showing off the cute gift that Su had just given her. Hezi stood there in stunned silence, her heart sinking into her stomach as she realized her own gift had been completely overshadowed. Xuanzi lay back, a mischievous glint in her eyes as she admired the little bear dangling from her phone, completely unaware of the storm she had accidentally brewed. You see, she was convinced that the matching keychain Hezi had meticulously picked out for LZ was actually a romantic gesture from Jane. Across the room, Hezi's heart sank as she watched LZ proudly display a different bear on her bag, a gift from Su. A wave of bitter jealousy washed over her as she stared at the little blue trinket, her mind spiraling with a single, painful question. Why was LZ using Su's gift, but not the one she had given her? The atmosphere in the apartment turned frigid as Hezi began to move through the halls like a ghost, her silence speaking louder than any shout. She sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, her eyes glazed over with a hurt she wasn't ready to name. LZ hovered in the background, her own expression a mix of confusion and mounting anxiety as she felt the weight of that icy wall between them. Finally, unable to take the tension any longer, LZ tried to bridge the gap, but Hezi just stared back with an unreadable, heartbreakingly distant look. I think Hezi is actually angry at me, LZ wailed later, her face scrunched up in a comical display of despair as she vented to Xuanzi. Xuanzi looked on with a raised eyebrow, trying to make sense of the sudden drama while LZ clutched her green beanie like a lifeline. She hasn't said a single word to me in 18 hours. LZ cried, her voice trembling with the realization that their domestic bliss had suddenly shattered. Xuanzi tried to offer some comfort, pulling the frantic girl into a steadying embrace while she thought over the situation. Don't worry too much, Xuanzi suggested, though she looked a bit skeptical herself. Maybe it's just that time of the month for Jane, and she's rubbing off on her. But LZ wasn't so sure, her mind racing back through every possible mistake she could have made to trigger this Cold War. Was it the morning she had stubbornly refused to crawl out from under the warm covers, ignoring Hezi's gentle calls? Or perhaps it was the time she acted like a difficult child, refusing to take her medicine even when she was shivering with a fever. Her face flushed a deep crimson as she remembered the most scandalous possibility: the night she had boldly walked out of the bathroom without a stitch of clothing on. Look, I have to head to work, but I'll try to get to the bottom of this for you, Xuanzi promised, giving LZ a reassuring thumbs up. LZ watched her go, her eyes wide and hopeful, before her thoughts drifted to their other roommates. Speaking of which, when are Xiao Yu and Akari finally coming back from their trip? She wondered aloud. Far away, amidst the crisp air of their vacation, Akari let out a sudden sneeze, wondering if someone back home was talking about her. Back at the apartment, Hezi stepped into the room, her shoulders slumped with a wariness that went deeper than just being tired. Her eyes landed on a small frame photo sitting on the nightstand, and her breath hitched. She picked it up, letting out a long, shaky sigh as she traced the smiles in the picture, her heart aching with a longing she tried so hard to suppress. Suddenly, the door burst open as Xuanzi barged in, catching her red-handed and making her jump nearly out of her skin. Still haven't managed to win her over, huh? Xuanzi teased, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing smirk. Hezi turned away, her ears turning a telltale shade of pink as she muttered that Elzai probably only saw her as a friend. But didn't she give you those handmade chocolates for Valentine's Day? Xuanzi pressed, her eyes wide with shock when she realized Hezi was the only one who had received them. She stared at her roommate in disbelief, feeling a sudden surge of pity for poor, oblivious LZ. Hezi, listen to me, someone has to be the one to make the first move, Xuanzi urged, her voice softening as she saw the genuine fear in her friend's eyes. But Hezi just shook her head, whispering that she was fine with things the way they were, because she didn't want her feelings to become a burden. Xuanzi groaned, leaning forward with an exasperated that said she wasn't buying it for a second. If you're happy just cleaning her room and picking her up from work, doesn't it feel like you're just taking care of a pet? She joked, only to have a cloth immediately whipped at her face. I'm trying to help you. Why are you attacking me? Swansea laughed, dodging the next projectile while Hazy told her to just stop talking. Finally, Hazy let out a frustrated huff, her defenses crumbling as she prepared to admit what was actually bothering her. She confessed that she was hurt because Elsie was only using the gift Susu gave her, completely ignoring Hazy's own token of affection. Swansea paused, her mind flashing back to the green beanie Elsie had been clutching earlier, and a realization began to dawn on her. The next morning at school, Elsie looked like she hadn't slept a wink, her eyes heavy as she greeted Susu in the hallway. Susu immediately noticed the dark clouds hanging over her friend's head and asked what was wrong. Elsie bit her lip, her mind still spinning with the no-clothes incident, wondering if that was truly the source of the friction. Susu's eyes went wide as she listened to the confused explanation, realizing that LZ was looking for answers in all the wrong places. Fighting is just a part of living together, Susu said gently, pulling LZ into a warm, comforting hug. LZ buried her face in Susu's shoulder, feeling a small spark of hope that maybe this wasn't the end of her friendship with Hedzi. So, what should I do to make it right? She asked, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. Susu smiled playfully, leaning in close to whisper that all it takes is a tiny, sweet peck on the cheek to melt away any anger. A kiss? But we're not. LZ stammered, her face exploding into a bright, feverish blush. Susu just laughed it off, waving her hand dismissively and telling her that there was nothing wrong with two girls being in love. We're not lovers. LZ screamed at the top of her lungs, her hands waving frantically as she tried to correct the massive misunderstanding. Susu froze, her jaw dropping as she blinked in utter confusion, unable to believe that after everything they'd been through, these two weren't actually together yet. Swansea stares at the small, tan bear in her palm, oblivious to the storm she's about to cause by accidentally pocketing the gift meant for someone else. Meanwhile, Elzai innocently clips on the blue keychain Susu gave her, completely unaware that this one small gesture is about to spark a massive misunderstanding. The air between the two is thick enough to cut with a knife as Hezi sits in stony silence, not having uttered a single word to Elzai in nearly an entire day. Susu can't believe her ears, her heart practically shattering as she grips Elzai's shoulders and screams, "What? You two aren't together yet." A staff member peeks through the door to interrupt the drama, calling them up for their next segment while Susu's to process the romantic catastrophe. Seeing her friend's distress, Susu softens her gaze, promising Elzai that they will find a way to clear up this mess eventually. She clenches her fist with determination, lecturing Elzai on how it's normal for young girls to have tantrums, but communication is the only way to survive. Elzai tries to maintain her dignity, claiming she isn't upset at all, even though her face is a comedic mask of streaming tears and snot. Susu just sighs, handing over a tissue and reminding her that Hezi could never truly stay angry at her for long. Internally, Susu is spiraling, wondering why on earth Hezi is ignoring her when they should be happy matching their keychains. She taps her chin, her eyes narrowing as she tries to piece together the puzzle of Hezi's cold behavior. Suddenly, a light bulb goes off in her head, and she realizes there is only one logical explanation for this level of drama. She must be at Sunder. Susu exclaims, her eyes widening at the revelation as Elzai looks on in pure confusion. Elzai repeats the word Sunder slowly, trying to imagine her stoic friend fitting into such a trope. She imagines Hezi acting all tough and cool on the outside, rejecting anything he deems too girly with a huff. But then she imagines the soft side, the side where he'd blush and confess that he actually likes her the most. The thought alone sends a massive blush creeping across Elzai's face, her heart thumping against her ribs at the mere possibility. After the workday ends, a colleague waves a friendly goodbye, leaving the girls to their own devices. Susu leans in with a playful smile, suggesting they head to the store to grab some drinks before heading home. As they browse the aisles, Elzai notices the bottles she wants are perched precariously on the very top shelf. She stretches her arm as far as it can go, her fingertips barely brushing the glass as she wobbles on her toes. Ugh. She grunts, her small frame failing her as she desperately tries to reach the drink. Her hand shakes with the effort, the frustration of being just an inch too short starting to set in. Suddenly, a much larger hand reaches over her head, casting a shadow across her vision. Elzai freezes as Susu practically cabedons her against the fridge, leaning in close to ask, "Is this what you're looking for?" Elzai can only manage a tiny, squeaky thanks as she clutches the bottle, her face heating up from the sudden proximity. The moment is so perfectly cinematic that a group of fans nearby can't help but start snapping photos of the two. Seeing the cameras, the girls quickly pivot, flashing peace signs and bright smiles for their adoring public. Sushi gives a final, charming smile to the crowd, announcing that it's finally time for them to head back home. Elzai pushes the door open with a weary sigh, announcing her return to the quiet apartment. The silence is heavy as she spots Hezi sitting on the couch, his eyes glued to his phone as he ignores her entry. Elzai sits down beside him, the space between them feeling like a vast, cold ocean that neither knows how to cross. She bites her lip, her mind racing with the fear that living together for so long has finally made them run out of things to say. She steals a nervous glance at him out of the corner of her eye, her hands trembling as she clutches her water glass. Hezi finally shifts, his eyes flicking toward her for just a second before he looks away again, the tension reaching a breaking point. In that moment, Susu's voice echoes in Elzai's head, screaming that all she needs to do is give him a kiss to fix everything. Driven by pure, frantic impulse, Elzai leans over and plants a sudden, soft kiss right on Xiaohezi's cheek. Xiaohezi recoils in absolute shock, his face exploding into a deep crimson as he stammers, "Why did you do that?" Elzai's voice trembles as the words finally pour out, confessing that she felt stupid and alone because he had stopped talking to her. Her eyes are wide and honest as she whispers the ultimate truth. "I hope you can stay with me forever." It's too much for Xiaohezi's heart to handle, and he literally ascends to heaven, a comedic soul escaping his body as he declares he can die happy. Once he returns to Earth, he rubs the back of his neck, shyly admitting he thought she hated his gift because she never used it. Elzai blinks in total bewilderment, her head tilting as she asks the million-dollar question. "What present?" Xiaohezi starts listing them off the teddy bear keychain, the green beanie looking more confused by the second. Elzai just stares at him, the realization slowly dawning that she never actually received any of those things. Xiaohezi lets out a startled laugh, realizing the entire 18-hour Cold War was based on a gift that was never even delivered. He looks at her with such warmth and tenderness, telling her that seeing her smile is worth more than any missing gift. Suddenly, Xuanzi strolls into the room with a cheerful wave, completely unaware that the tan bear keychain hanging off her bag is the source of all their misery. Xiaohezi's eyes bug out as he points at the stolen goods, and Elzai can only shout in disbelief as the mystery is finally solved. Xiao Yu was practically glowing as she packed her bags, thinking this business trip was the ultimate chance for a romantic getaway on the company's dime. With just her and the beautiful Akari, the possibilities for their relationship to bloom felt endless as they stepped onto the escalator together. She pumped herself up, determined to finally close the distance between them and make her move while they were far from home. But the universe had other plans as their friend Xiao Ya suddenly appeared in the cabin, shattering Xiao Yu's dreams of a private rendezvous. Xiao Ya teased her mercilessly, asking if she'd even bothered to check the member list before getting her hopes up. "Relax," Xiao Ya whispered with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I won't get between you two, I might even help you confess." Before Xiao Yu could even process the threat, Xiao Ya blurted out the secret to Akari, loudly claiming that Xiao Yu had just admitted her feelings. Akari, ever the enigma, simply smiled and replied that she liked her too, leaving Xiao Ya confused and Xiao Yu predictably flustered by the casual admission. Xiao Yu took a deep breath, realizing that true feelings can't be forced. They have to grow naturally over time. Since they were already living under the same roof, she decided to focus on deepening their bond day by day. Her heart burned with a new fire as she vowed that her sincerity would eventually move Akari's soul. However, as they settled into their flight, Akari was completely lost in the view outside the window, seemingly oblivious to the storm of emotions beside her. The overhead announcement signaled takeoff, forcing everyone to settle into their designated spots and fasten their belts. Xiao Ya waved goodbye as she headed to her own seat, leaving Xiao Yu hopeful for a moment of peace with her crush. Xiao Yu prepared to enjoy the flight, her heart hammering against her ribs at the thought of being so close to Akari. But her face fell instantly when she realized a stranger had taken the middle seat, completely blocking her path to the woman she loved. Stuck in her own row, Xiao Yu could only gaze longingly at Akari, who looked breathtakingly elegant even in the simple cabin light. Everything about Akari, her confidence, her gentle nature, and her caring soul drew Xiao Yu in like a moth to a flame. She felt a magnetic pull she couldn't resist, her eyes fixed on the profile of the woman who occupied her every thought. Suddenly, the older man sitting next to her leaned in far too close, his voice dripping with an unwanted, oily charm. "Hi, beautiful," he sneered, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. Xiao Yu froze in pure disgust as the man suggested he give her his number once they landed. Just as she felt cornered and panicked, a firm hand clamped down on the man's shoulder, stopping him dead in his tracks. Akari stood there with a gaze that could cut through steel, her grip tightening until the man let out a pained yelp. With a voice as cold as ice, she commanded him to leave her girlfriend alone, the protective fire in her eyes leaving no room for argument. After the stewardess helped them switch seats, the tension finally began to bleed out of Xiao Yu's shaking frame. Akari leaned over, her expression softening instantly as she checked to see if her companion was all right. She reached out and gently patted Xiao Yu's head, a tender gesture that made the younger girl's heart skip a beat. "Don't worry," Akari whispered with a small, reassuring smile, "I'll protect you." The drama didn't end at the airport, as the group arrived at the hotel only to find that the staff had only booked 2 rooms. Akari naturally suggested sharing a room with Xiao Yu, a proposal that sent a jolt of electricity through the air. Xiao Ya suggested they use their free time for some stuff, but a weary Xiao Yu just wanted to collapse into bed. Xiao Ya wasn't about to let the night end quietly, her eyes sparkling with a familiar, chaotic mischief. Instead of sleeping, Xiao Ya insisted on the dorm tradition of telling ghost stories, much to Xiao Yu's annoyance. "I'm creating a perfect opportunity for you, idiot," Xiao Ya whispered, nudging her friend toward the supposedly terrified Akari. Xiao Yu tried to play along, pretending to be a little scared just to see how Akari would react to her vulnerability. But it turned out Akari was the one truly paralyzed with fear, hiding herself completely under the heavy white blankets. Seeing her cool protector reduced to a trembling mess, Xiao Yu's protective instincts kicked in as she comforted the shivering girl. As the story reached its climax, Akari lunged forward, seeking refuge from the imaginary ghosts. She threw herself into Xiao Yu's arms, crying out that she couldn't take the fear any longer. Xiao Yu held her tight, her own face flushing bright red as she realized she couldn't take the overwhelming cuteness of this unexpected cuddle. With the lights out and the shadows looming, Akari admitted she was too spooked to sleep alone tonight. She looked up with pleading eyes, asking if Xiao Yu would stay by her side until morning. Xiao Yu didn't hesitate for a second, her heart soaring as she gave a resounding yes. Xiao Ya tried to invite herself into the bed as well, but Xiao Yu shut that down with a fierce, jealous glare. Seeing that her work was finally done, Xiao Ya relented, deciding to leave the two of them to their private moment. Xiao Yu watched her go, a sincere wave of gratitude washing over her for her friend's meddling. Xiao Ya huffed one last time, warning that if Akari ever dumped her, she'd be right back to claim Xiao Yu for herself. Xiao Yu and Akari arrived at their destination, the air between them thick with the promise of a delightful business trip. Xiao Yu watched her companion with a soft, knowing smile that made Akari's heart skip a beat. Akari felt herself melting under that gaze, her face flushing a deep crimson as she was pulled into the other woman's orbit. She squeezed her eyes shut, desperately hoping this intoxicating feeling would never end. Later that evening, Akari sank into the warmth of the hotel bathtub, letting the steam carry the day's exhaustion. She giggled to herself, imagining this wasn't just a work trip, but a secret honeymoon for just the two of them. Her thoughts drifted to Xiao Yu alone in the next room, wondering if the silence was getting to her. Suddenly, the door creaked open and Xiao Yu peeked in, her voice trembling as she asked to join the bath. "I'm still a bit scared of being by myself," Xiao Yu admitted, her eyes searching Akari's for comfort. She confessed that despite her age, the thought of the supernatural still left her chilled to the bone. "You don't mind, do you?" she whispered, the intimacy of the small space heightening every breath. Akari ducked beneath the water's surface, her mind racing to find any semblance of composure. Xiao Yu casually mentioned how girls back in school would always wash each other's backs. Akari's imagination ran wild, her heart hammering against her ribs at the thought of such a tender touch. Trying to break the tension, she babbled about scrubbing customs she had heard of from northeast China. Before she could finish, Xiao Yu leaned in close, her presence suddenly overwhelming and intense. Akari sat frozen, her breath hitching as Xiao Yu began to gently scrub her skin. Xiao Yu hummed a sweet, rhythmic tune, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she was causing in Akari's heart. The gentle friction of the sponge felt like fire against Akari's sensitized skin. When they finally finished, Xiao Yu sighed with pure contentment, feeling refreshed and renewed. Back in the safety of the bedroom, Akari buried her face in a pillow, her muffled screams of embarrassment echoing in the fabric. "You saw everything. You have to take responsibility for me now," she cried out, her face still burning. Xiao Yu just smiled playfully, pointing a finger as she declared she would take full responsibility. "From now on, you'll be my official hugging pillow," she laughed, pulling Akari into a tight embrace. The two settled into a comfortable rhythm, the boundaries between them blurring with every shared look. They spent their quiet moments close together, finding a strange, new peace in each other's company. Even when things felt a little silly, the underlying chemistry was impossible to ignore. Akari realized she didn't actually mind being a hugging pillow if it meant staying in those arms. As they relaxed, Xiao Yu began to muse about the cultural differences between China and Japan. She brought up the Tanabata festival, wondering how Akari usually spent the romantic holiday. "We always do heavy exercise to celebrate," Xiao Yu claimed with a bright, innocent grin. Akari's jaw dropped, her mind immediately jumping to a much more scandalous conclusion. She flashed back to her school days when a close friend, Yui-chan, would visit her every year for the festival. They had made a solemn promise to always celebrate the day to its absolute fullest. Akari looked at Xiao Yu, wondering if her old friend had shared these same hidden feelings. However, the heavy exercise turned out to be nothing more than a grueling session of kendo practice. "Good work today, Akari," Xiao Yu whispered as they finally climbed into the large hotel bed. Akari lay still, her eyes wide as she felt the shift in the air between them. She turned her head slightly, finding Xiao Yu watching her with an unreadable expression. "Wah!" Akari squeaked as Xiao Yu suddenly moved closer, invading her personal space. "I don't think I can sleep by myself tonight. Can I stay right here?" Xiao Yu asked, her voice low and pleading. Akari could only nod, her voice trapped in her throat by the sheer proximity of the woman she adored. Xiao Yu grabbed Akari's hands, promising to do her a favor in return for the company. "I'll wash your back next time," she promised, a mischievous glint in her eyes. As the night deepened, they talked about the upcoming yearly break and their plans for the holidays. Akari asked if Xiao Yu would be heading back home to see her family. Xiao Yu looked thoughtful, mentioning how she felt she had missed out on the true beauty of Japan during her university years. Then, with a soft smile, she asked, "Would you like to come visit my family with me for the new year?" Xiao Yu's mind drifts back to that fateful Christmas business trip where everything began to shift. The tension between them had reached a boiling point when Akari, with a soft smile, asked if she could wash her friend's back in the steam of the bath. But the real shock came later, when Akari leaned in close and invited her to visit Japan for the New Year celebrations. Xiao Yu clutched the invitation, her heart thumping against her ribs, as she wondered if this relationship was moving far too fast for her heart to handle. As the holidays approached, they found themselves side by side on a plane, Akari looking at her with genuine concern as they left their usual lives behind. Akari explained that while Xiao Yu was used to the Lunar New Year, Japan had already transitioned to the Gregorian calendar. Xiao Yu's brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to calculate exactly what day it was in Tokyo. Suddenly, the realization hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just any day, it was Valentine's Day. She let out a silent, panicked scream, her face flushing crimson at the thought of landing in Japan on the most romantic day of the year. Akari noticed the sudden change in her friend's complexion, leaning in to ask if she was feeling all right as they touched down. "Don't worry," Akari whispered as they finally reached her doorstep. "I told my father we were coming, and he's ready to welcome you." The door flew open, and instead of a warm welcome, a man's voice roared that he would never hand his precious daughter over. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with interrogation as Akari's father sat with his arms crossed, promising keep a very close eye on his daughter's co-worker. Akari gave her a reassuring look, explaining that her father was just trying to make up for lost time by being overly protective. Xiao Yu felt a wave of relief wash over her, realizing the man's sharp tongue was just a shield for his soft heart. But that relief was short-lived when another figure stepped into the room, causing Xiao Yu's jaw to drop in pure shock. Standing there was Akita, Akari's younger brother, who possessed the exact same striking features as his sister. Akari introduced him with a casual smile, mentioning he was currently attending university while Xiao Yu stared in disbelief. Xiao Yu could hardly believe her eyes, stuttering that she never knew Akari had a brother who looked so much like her. She couldn't help but think that since he shared Akari's face, his personality must be just as charming and sweet. However, the moment they were alone, Akita leaned in with a devious glint in his eye and asked, "You like my sister, right?" He adjusted his glasses like a master detective, citing his first piece of evidence: the way Xiao Yu's face turned unnaturally red whenever Akari was near. Then came the second piece of proof: he had seen the hidden photo of Akari in her wallet when she dropped her luggage earlier. He didn't stop there, pointing directly at her hand and noting the specific way she kept her nails perfectly short. Xiao Yu felt like she was sinking into the floor, mortified that this observant brother had unraveled all her secrets in mere minutes. Thankfully, Akari returned and ushered her brother out, declaring it was time for some private girls-only time. With a soft, shy expression, Akari admitted that even though the new year had passed, she had still prepared a special gift for her guest. Xiao Yu's heart skipped a beat as she looked at her friend, overwhelmed by the kindness in those dark, beautiful eyes. Akari explained the Japanese tradition of writing heartfelt wishes to those you care about on special cards. She set out the stationery and encouraged Xiao Yu to write down whatever was truly on her mind. Xiao Yu stared at the blank paper, her hand trembling as she struggled to find the right words for a day that was secretly Valentine's. Finally, her heart took over, and she carefully penned the words, "I like Akari." When Akari peeked over, Xiao Yu frantically crumpled the paper, stammering that she hadn't written anything important at all. Suddenly, Akita's head popped back through the door, calling his sister away for a quick moment. Akari waved her hand, telling Xiao Yu to just relax and wait for her to return. As soon as the door closed, curiosity got the better of Xiao Yu, and she leaned over to see what Akari had written on her card. Her breath hitched and her heart hammered against her chest as she saw the simple, beautiful script: "I like Xiao Yu." The door creaked open and Xiao Yu spun around, her face burning as she tried to apologize for looking at the card. The words spilled out of her in a rush, a desperate confession that she had liked Akari for such a long time. But her heart sank into her stomach when she realized the person standing in the doorway was actually Akita. The brother watched her with a smirk, reminding her that he shared his sister's looks and even her hobbies. He teased her further, suggesting that since loving a girl was so much hard work, she might find it easier to pick him instead. Xiao Yu stood her ground, her eyes softening with a deep, unshakable conviction. "I didn't fall in love with an appearance," she whispered firmly. "I fell for the girl named Asakura Akari." Just then, Akari reappeared, holding a gift and wishing her a very happy Valentine's Day. Akita crossed his arms and gave her a small nod, promising that she hadn't been overheard, but urging her to say those words to Akari herself next time. Akari smiled brightly, handing over the chocolates as their eyes met in a moment of pure, sweet connection. The air was thick with the bittersweet scent of departures as friends waved their final goodbyes before the New Year rush. With suitcases in hand and smiles plastered on their faces, Xuanzi and Jane watched as their companions headed out, promising to see each other in the coming year. As the door clicked shut, the silence of the room felt heavy, and Xuanzi couldn't help but sigh, envying those who didn't have to spend the holidays apart. "How nice. They're from the same city, so they don't have to separate," she grumbled, her chin resting on her hands as she watched Jane begin the arduous task of packing. Jane looked over her shoulder, a playful glint in her eyes as she teased her friend for being such a dreamer. "You can still spare time to dream? Hurry up and pack your things," she commanded, though her tone was softened by a fond smile. Xuanzi wailed in mock despair, tears pricking her eyes as she realized the inevitable separation was drawing closer with every folded shirt. Jane stood over her luggage, her hands on her hips as she tried to maintain a sense of order amidst the emotional chaos. "All right, enough messing around. Come help me check if I forgot anything," she sighed, her voice grounding Xuanzi back to reality. They began the final inventory, a ritual of mundane checks that felt like a countdown to goodbye. Jane peered into the depths of the suitcase, ticking off the essentials. Clothes, check. she muttered, ensuring her wardrobe was ready for the trip home. Next came the tools of her trade, the heavy device that kept her connected to her professional life even during the break. Work laptop, check, she continued, her focus remaining sharp despite the looming farewell. But when she looked down for the final item, she found something, or rather, someone tucked away amidst the fabric. Xuanzai had curled herself into a tiny ball inside the suitcase, looking up with a pout that could melt stone. Xuanzi, check, Jane deadpanned, her heart fluttering at the ridiculous, adorable sight. Gently, Jane reached down to stroke Xuanzi's hair, her touch a tender reassurance in the quiet room. Can you really not bear to see me go? Your winter break only lasts for a month, she whispered, trying to the voice of reason. But Xuanzi just leaned into the touch, her eyes clouded with a longing that a mere 30 days couldn't soothe. I know what you're saying, but it's just that I won't be able to see my beloved Jane for an entire month, she whimpered, the thought of the distance already aching in her chest. Jane eventually pulled away, grabbing the handle of her suitcase as she prepared to step out into the hallway. Technology is a heaven sent, so if you ever miss me, feel free to video call me whenever, she reminded her, waving a final hand as she headed toward her afternoon flight. However, she knew her friend all too well and had to bark out one final stern warning. Don't call me as soon as I step out, she shouted back, even as Xuanzi's digital wailing began to vibrate in her pocket. The scene shifts to the quiet moment right before the final parting, the two of them standing in the threshold of the elevator. The tension between them was palpable, a silent exchange of all the words they were too afraid to say out loud. They stood side by side, the descent of the elevator feeling like a countdown to a world without each other's constant presence. Xuanzi looked up, her expression a mix of confusion and hope as Jane shifted closer. And she breathed, her heart skipping a beat at the sudden proximity. Then, in a moment of pure, unadulterated affection, Jane leaned in and pressed a soft kiss against Xuanzi's burning cheek. Happy New Year, baby. I'll miss you too, she whispered, leaving Xuanzi frozen and blushing a deep, radiant crimson. Hours later, the cold air of her hometown greeted Jane as she dragged her suitcase through the front door. The exhaustion of the journey weighed on her shoulders, but she managed a weary smile. I finally made it. Mom, Dad, I'm home, she announced, the familiar walls of her childhood sanctuary closing in around her. Her parents rushed to the door, their faces beaming with a parental pride that was almost overwhelming. You're here. Go wash your hands, the food's ready. They chirped, their excitement filling the entryway. But as Jane stood there, she noticed their eyes darting past her, searching the empty hallway behind her with expectant gazes. Jane's brow furrowed in confusion as she realized they weren't just looking for her. What are you looking at? She asked, her voice tinged with a sudden, sinking suspicion. Her father looked at her with a nervous, hopeful smile, his glasses sliding down his nose. Xiao Xia didn't come back with you, he asked, referring to the man they believed was her boyfriend. Jane's face twisted into a mask of annoyance. I thought you wanted to see Me, she barked, her irritation flaring at the mention of the fake relationship she had used to keep them at bay. But the interrogation was far from over, as the door swung open to reveal a swarm of curious relatives. Hey, the big girl's home. Come catch up with your auntie, won't you? Her aunt chirped, her eyes gleaming with the hunger for fresh gossip. The living room soon became a battlefield of expectations and tall tales. Her mother stood in the center of the room, her nose in the air as she bragged to the relatives about Jane's mysterious partner. My daughter's partner is so handsome. He's Hona Saint-Samatol and has a good face and build, she exaggerated, her hands gesturing wildly as Jane watched in horrified silence. The pressure mounted until the auntie leaned in, her eyes narrowing behind her spectacles. We thought you were going to bring him back home this year, but do you have a picture? Let us see so we can be the judge of it, she demanded. Jane felt a cold sweat break out on her neck as she fumbled with her phone, her mind racing for a solution. I have no pictures of Xia Hezi, she realized with a jolt of panic, her gallery filled with nothing but candids of a very different person. Desperate, she fired off a frantic text to her friend, begging for a photo of the boyfriend to save her credibility with the family. The relatives crowded around her, their faces a mix of skepticism and intense curiosity as they waited for the digital proof. Finally, Jane held up the screen, her voice trembling slightly. Here, this is my boyfriend. She lied, showing a photo of a delicate, stylish individual with long hair and a hip aesthetic. The relatives gasped, leaning in to scrutinize the image of the person they assumed was a young man. This boy looks so delicate, though. How trendy. Is this what the youngsters call hip? The aunt mused, her eyes wide with bewilderment. Jane forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs as she handed the phone back, hoping they wouldn't look too closely at the boyfriend's feminine features. But the judgment continued, the older generation whispering amongst themselves about the lack of security such a pretty boy provided. I saw the piercings too. I hope he's not a gangster, one whispered, their voices a low hum of disapproval. Later that night, Jane collapsed onto the sofa, the weight of the day finally crushing her. She let out a long, weary sigh, the silence of the house feeling empty without the chaotic energy of her real partner. Suddenly, her phone buzzed against the cushion, a notification lighting up the dark room. It was a message from Xuanzi, a simple, heartfelt "I miss you, dear," that sent a wave of warmth through Jane's chest. She looked back at the crowd of relatives still lingering in the other room and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. Let me say something about Hezi, she began, her voice steady and filled with a hidden truth. She didn't describe the fake boyfriend. She described the person who actually held her heart. He may seem like he's dodgy or immature, but when you get to know him, you'll realize he's a person who is loving, dependable, and supportive, she said, her eyes softening with every word. She spoke of the small gestures, the breakfast spot in secret, and the way they stayed up all night just to listen to each other's voices. He's also working to become a better person, so... She trailed off, a radiant, genuine smile breaking across her face. The relatives were stunned by the sheer sincerity in her voice, their skepticism melting away into a chorus of, "We approve of this marriage." Jane could only laugh nervously, her fist clenched in a victory she couldn't fully explain to them. "Thanks," she whispered as her father waved a final goodbye to the visitors, leaving her finally alone in the quiet of the night. She retreated to her bed, the glow of her phone screen the only light in the room as she stared at the messages from the girl she had left behind. A photo popped up, Xuanzi making a silly face, her eyes squeezed shut in a playful pose that made Jane's heart ache with longing. "I miss you too," Jane whispered to the empty room, her thumb tracing the image on the glass. She initiated a video call, and Xuanzi's face immediately filled the screen, her cheeks flushed and her eyes searching his face for any sign of trouble. "Are you home? Why so late? Was your plane delayed?" She peppered Jane with questions, her concern radiating through the digital connection. Jane leaned back against her pillows, a soft smile playing on her lips as she watched her dear ramble on. "Yeah, it was delayed," she lied gently, just wanting to hear the sound of that familiar voice. Xuanzi leaned closer to her own camera, her lips puckered into a dramatic, digital kiss. "Here's a kiss for you, dear," she chirped, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Jane instinctively pulled her phone back, a look of mock disgust crossing her face. "Do you know how much bacteria lives on your phone camera? Don't kiss me if you're gonna kiss your phone," she scolded, though her eyes were filled with nothing but love. The screen flickered as a new message arrived, Xuanzi claiming she had finally arrived somewhere, while Jane complained about being worn out and ready for bed. Suddenly, a sharp ding-dong echoed through Jane's quiet house, making her jump and look toward the door with wide, startled eyes. She stood up, her heart racing as she walked toward the entrance, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. "Coming," she called out, and as the door swung open, there stood Xuanzi, a peace sign held up and a triumphant grin on her face. "Hey dear," she chirped, the greatest surprise of all standing right there on the doorstep. Because of the New Year's break, the girls of Lily apartment are forced to spend their holidays apart, leaving a lingering ache in their hearts. Returning home isn't exactly a vacation, as it comes with a relentless interrogation from curious relatives who want to know every detail of her life. In the middle of the family chaos, Jane finds herself staring at her phone, her heart heavy with a longing she can't quite voice. But life has a funny way of delivering surprises exactly when you feel the most alone. "Are you surprised? Are you shocked?" A familiar voice rings out, and Jane can hardly believe the person she was just pining for is standing right there on her doorstep. The two of them stand frozen on opposite sides of the glass, a million unspoken words passing between them in a single, breathless moment. Realizing they can't be seen together like this, Jane reaches for the door with a trembling hand, the click of the lock sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet house. "Come in," she hisses, grabbing her surprise visitor and pulling her into the safety of the hallway before anyone else sees. Jane's heart is racing as she corners her partner, her voice a mix of panic and confusion as she demands to know why she isn't at home with her own parents. The girl just looks at her with soft, vulnerable eyes, her voice barely a whisper as she confesses the simple truth. "I missed you." Jane's anger melts away instantly, replaced by a warmth that spreads through her chest, even as she tries to keep a worried frown on her face. Suddenly, the front door swings open and a voice booms through the house. "Daughter, we're back," sending both girls into a state of pure, unadulterated panic. "Quick! You need to hide," Jane whispers frantically, her eyes darting around the room for any possible sanctuary. She barely manages to usher her guest out of sight before her father appears, looking surprised to see her still awake at such a late hour. Jane's mother follows close behind, exhausted from the long day and ready to settle in for the night. "Wait! No!" Jane shrieks, her voice cracking as she realizes her mother is heading straight for the very room where her secret guest is hiding. She forces a nervous laugh, blocking the doorway with her own body and claiming she desperately needs to use the bathroom first. Behind the closed door, the two girls exchange a look of sheer terror, realizing that one wrong move could reveal everything. "You done? I'm coming in for a shower," her mother says, her voice muffled by the door as Jane tries to think of a way out. Jane's heart hammers against her ribs as she tries to come up with a plan, her mind spinning with a dozen different excuses. Crouched in the shadows, the guest watches through a crack in the door, praying that Jane's mother doesn't decide to barge in. The girl gasps silently, her eyes widening as she realizes just how close she is to being caught red-handed in the middle of the night. She feels like her heart might actually stop beating as she huddles in the darkness, the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. Suddenly, her mother's voice drifts in again, asking Jane to pass her a towel, and the girl realizes she has to act fast. "Oh, right." Her mother continues, oblivious to the tension. "When I sent your aunts off, they were all talking about your boyfriend." The words hit the girl like a physical blow, her eyes clouding with a sudden, sharp pang of insecurity. She can't help but compare herself to this ideal boyfriend, feeling a heavy weight in her chest as she wonders if she'll ever be enough for Jane's family. "My girl, what happened to your voice?" her mother asks, noticing the strange, strangled tone coming from behind the curtain. Jane's mother steps in the bathroom, looking around with a confused expression as she tries to locate her daughter. She reaches for the shower curtain, her hand hovering just inches away from revealing the hidden girl. Jane bursts in just in time, wearing a strained smile and claiming she has a terrible sore throat that's ruined her voice. Her guest remains huddled on the floor, her hands over her mouth to stifle any sound while her mother's feet are visible just inches away. Finally, the danger passes and they retreat to the safety of Jane's bedroom, where Jane lets out a long, shaky breath of relief. "Dear, doesn't it feel like we're having an affair right now?" the girl teases, wrapping her arms around Jane from behind in a playful embrace. Jane blushes furiously, her heart still thumping as she tries to maintain some semblance of order while her partner holds her close. "Should I wash these spare clothes you brought?" Jane asks, trying to focus on anything other than the heat of the girl's body against hers. "All right, don't sleep too late," her mother warns from the doorway. One final check-in that nearly sends them both through the roof. Jane's mother lingers for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she takes in the suspicious amount of plushies piled onto the bed. "Mom," Jane squeaks, frantically pulling the covers up to hide the very human shape tucked beneath the stuffed animals. Her mother gives her one last skeptical look before finally turning away, promising to help her clean up the mess in the morning. "Good thing I acted quickly," the girl whispers, emerging from her hiding spot beneath the duvet with a mischievous glint in her eyes. But the humor fades as Jane looks at her, her expression softening into something deeply apologetic and sad. "It's not your fault," the girl reassures her, her voice full of a gentle strength that makes Jane's heart ache. "I wish for the day where we can be together out in the open," Jane whispers, her eyes filled with a desperate, beautiful hope. They lean into each other, the weight of their secret shared between them, finding comfort in the quiet intimacy of the room. Jane wipes away a stray tear, laughing softly through the emotion that threatens to overwhelm her during the holiday. Her mother pokes her head back in one last time, catching them in a moment of pure, frozen silence. The world seems to stand still as they realize the game might finally be up, their hearts beating in frantic unison. The holiday season was supposed to be a time of rest, but for Xuanzi and Jane, returning to their families for the new year felt more like walking into a lion's den. Xuanzi, unable to bear even a moment of separation, had stubbornly followed Jane all the way back to her childhood home. The cozy atmosphere shattered instantly when Xuanzi overheard Jane's mother through a cracked door, gossiping about her daughter's supposed boyfriend. They thought they could sneak a few moments of affection in the hallway, but a sudden noise sent their hearts into their throats as they realized they weren't alone. Jane's mother stood there, her gaze sharp and questioning as she caught the two girls in a compromisingly close position. Without a word, the older woman turned her back, the silence in the hallway feeling heavier than any shouted accusation. Xuanzai and Jane stood frozen, sweat beads forming on their brows as they realized how narrowly they had avoided a total disaster. Looking at the woman's rigid posture, Xuanzi whispered under her breath, "This reaction, there's no doubt that she's your mother." The interrogation began almost immediately at the dinner table, with Jane's parents scolding her for not giving them a proper heads-up before dropping by. Sensing the rising tension, Jane's father tried to play the peacemaker, suggesting that Xuanzi must be exhausted from the trip and should head to the guest room. Xuanzi, trying to be helpful but failing miserably, chirped that she'd just sleep with Jane since they were already used to it. Jane's eyes nearly popped out of her head as she lunged forward, clapping a hand over Xuanzi's mouth and rambling about how they were just roommates at Lily apartment. Finally, they managed to retreat to the safety of Jane's bedroom, where Xuanzi collapsed onto the mattress with a groan of pure relief. She rolled over, burying her face in the pillow and inhaling deeply, a dazed smile spreading across her face, because everything smelled like Jane. She grabbed a nearby teddy bear, squeezing the plush toy tightly as she basked in the intimacy of being in Jane's private sanctuary. Her romantic mood was slightly dampened, however, when she picked up a towel to nuzzle it, only for Jane to flatly inform her that she used that specific one to wipe her feet. The next morning, the sun rose on a new set of challenges as Jane's mother called out that it was time for breakfast. A disheveled and groggy Xuanzi stumbled out of the room, sleepily murmuring, "Morning, my dear," before remembering where she was. The breakfast table was a battlefield of clinking silverware and awkward glances, with the parents watching their every move. Xuanzi tried to maintain her composure, offering her dearest gratitude for the meal while Jane looked like she wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Hoping to get them out of the house, Jane's father suggested the two of them visit the plaza to see the New Year's festivities. Stepping out into the crisp air, Xuanzi felt a swell of affection, looking around the streets and realizing this was the world that had shaped the woman she loved. Jane, however, was a bundle of nerves, noting that holding hands in her traditional hometown felt like a much bigger risk than in the city. Her intuition was proven right when a familiar voice called out, and they found themselves face to face with Jane's aunt. Xuanzi immediately shifted into her most polite mode, offering a bright greeting to the older woman. The aunt's eyes widened behind her glasses as she leaned in, whispering to Jane about how her boyfriend was much more delicate and girl-like than she expected. Jane could only offer a strained, nervous laugh, while Xuanzi stood in the background with a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. Xuanzi watched them whisper, her mind racing as she tried to decipher what Jane's boyfriend had to do with her. She began to wonder if they were comparing her to some guy named Xia Hazy, and the thought made her stomach churn. Jane caught the look of distress on her face and realized with a jolt of amusement that Xuanzi was actually getting jealous of her own cover story. A wave of boldness washed over Jane as she decided to lean into the misunderstanding, enjoying the rare chance to show off their bond in the light of day. With a radiant, mischievous smile, she pulled Xuanzi close and officially introduced her to the aunt as her boyfriend. Once the aunt had finally shuffled away, Xuanzi clutched her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs from the sheer audacity of the lie. She looked at Jane in disbelief, joking that the entire family must have terrible eyesight if they were falling for this. Getting into the spirit of things, Xuanzi struck a handsome pose, asking if she really looked that much like a heartthrob. Jane didn't miss a beat, ruthlessly listing off Xuanzi's deep voice, masculine bone structure, and lack of makeup as the reasons why the ruse worked. Xuanzi's ego took a hilarious hit as she buried her face in her hands, pleading for Jane to stop the compliments. The New Year's plaza was a sea of people, the crowd surging around them like a restless tide. In the middle of the chaos, Jane's hand slipped away, and she spun around in a panic, calling out Xuanzi's name. A firm, warm hand suddenly clamped around her wrist, pulling her back from the verge of a breakdown. "I'm here," Xuanzi whispered, her eyes filled with a protective tenderness as she pulled Jane into her space. They wandered toward a wish stand, where rows of wooden tablets hung, holding the secret hopes of thousands. Xuanzi grabbed a pen, her expression becoming intensely focused as she began to write down her deepest desires. Her list was a chaotic mix of sweet and scandalous, ranging from staying together, forever to seeing Jane in a maid outfit. Jane let out a shocked laugh, playfully smacking Xuanzi's head for filling the sacred tablet with such strange wishes. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the crowd fading as they shared a quiet, intimate look. Jane turned back to the stand, carefully hanging her own tablet among the others. When Xuanzi teased her, asking what she had written, Jane just gave her a knowing, beautiful smile and said it was a secret while the tablet behind her clearly read, "I wish to stay with you forever." Hazy calls out to Elzai, urgency in her voice, as they prepare to leave Guangzhou behind with a plane to catch. But Elzai isn't moving an inch, her eyes fixed on the chaotic mountain of luggage she still needs to conquer. Hazy sighs, a puff of exasperation escaping her lips as she wonders how a short trip home resulted in so much baggage for her friend to organize. Suddenly, Elzai stumbles into view, practically buried under a mountain of sausages from her granny and clothes from her doting parents. The sheer volume of gifts is enough to make Hazy's jaw drop, wondering how they'll ever fit it all in the overhead bins. Finally, the duo makes it back to the bustling energy of Shanghai, greeted by a familiar face peeking through the doorway with a wide grin. The air is filled with excitement as the group reunites, immediately diving into the most important question. Did they bring any local souvenirs? Akari's eyes sparkle with anticipation, leaning in close to see what treasures they've brought back from their hometown. With a playful smirk, Elzai gestures toward the exhausted Hazy, offering her up as the only local souvenir worth having. The conversation shifts to the heavy stuff, as Akari waves a cheerful greeting, her mind still reeling from the holidays. She blushes a deep, rosy red, her hand flying to her cheek as she confesses the milestone of finally meeting her partner's parents this year. Not to be outdone, Jane wears a confident, satisfied grin, announcing that she also made the big trip to meet the family. Hazy and Elzai just stand there, their lifelong bond making the whole meeting the parents thing feel like old news to everyone else. Later, in a moment of quiet reflection, Akari wonders how her partner's brother could be so perceptive while her own love remains so hopelessly oblivious. She leans in toward Jane, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper as she asks if the parents suspect the true nature of their relationship. Jane looks away, a bead of nervous sweat on her brow as she tries to convince herself that their silence means everything is fine. But deep down, the doubt lingers, leading to frantic late-night searches on her phone about whether close friends normally share such intimate kisses. Back at the dorms, Hazy calls out for help, the mundane task of cleaning bringing the group's different dynamics into sharp focus. Xiao Yu watches them with a raised eyebrow, questioning why the two childhood friends have started mixing all their belongings together in one pile. She points out with a mischievous glint in her eye that friends usually keep a clear line between their stuff, no matter how close they are. Akari looks down at her phone, a pang of insecurity hitting her as she realizes she and her own partner still keep everything strictly separate. The group decides to test the limits of their boundaries, starting with the idea of a shared closet, which both girls agree to with a simple shrug. Then comes the idea of a shared cup, and while they hesitate for a heartbeat, they eventually offer a tentative okay. But when the suggestion of a shared towel comes up, the tension in the room spikes, the intimacy idea finally pushing them toward a nervous, maybe not. And don't even think about shared lip balm. The mere thought has them recoiling in absolute, blushing horror as they shout their refusal. Xiaoyu crosses her arms, her gaze turning sharp as she grills Hezi on why she still hasn't made a real move after being by her side for so long. She leans in, preaching about the power of commitment and perseverance, claiming that's how she won her own romantic battles. Akari listens intently, her eyes wide with admiration for what she thinks is a beautiful success story. That is, until Xiaoyu casually mentions that her perseverance involved a month of stalking to find out a bra size, leaving Akari screaming in terror. Hezi looks away, her face flushing a deep crimson as she admits that she hasn't been entirely idle herself. With a shy, almost guilty smile, she confesses that she's been secretly collecting things Elzai leaves behind on the bed. The girls lean in, their imaginations running wild with scandalous possibilities like silk underwear or lace bras. But the truth is much weirder. Hezi holds her head in her hands as she admits it's just hair earning her the title of the group's true pervert. Wanting to bridge the gap, Akari decides to play matchmaker, pushing Hezi toward Elzai to finally clear the air between them. She corners Elzai with a playful look, claiming she has a very important question that needs an immediate answer. With a mischievous grin, she asks if Elzai would ever date someone who looked acted and felt exactly like Hezi. Elzai just blinks, the sheer absurdity of the question leaving her completely deadpan as she points out that person is literally just Hezi. The air between them thickens with a sudden, heavy tension as Elzai turns Hezi directly in the eyes. A long, loaded silence follows, the kind that makes your heart hammer against your ribs in the quiet room. Hezi's breath hitches, her cheeks burning as she waits for a rejection that she's sure is finally coming. Akari watches from the sidelines, her heart melting at the sight of the two adorable kids finally facing their hidden feelings. Elzai sighs, admitting that while Hezi can be stubborn, dense, and sometimes a total idiot when it comes to understanding feelings, she can't help how she feels. She looks away, her silhouette framed by the soft light, as she lets the truth of her heart hang in the air. Her voice softens, a gentle tremor of vulnerability peeking through as she admits that if Hezi actually liked her, she breaks into a radiant, heart-stopping smile, confessing that she'd be more than happy to finally be something more. The romantic bubble is suddenly popped by a frantic vibration, the group jumping as a notification shatters the mood. Elzai picks up the phone, her confusion growing as a voice on the other end starts babbling about theater plans and missing her. But the real shock comes through the speaker, a panicked shout informing her that she hasn't just been noticed, she's gone completely viral online. The holiday was over, and the girls finally returned to the Lily apartment to settle back in. As they unpacked, the air was thick with the scent of fresh starts and the lingering excitement of the new year. For Shia Hezi, this return marked the beginning of a love story she never saw coming. But a sudden notification shattered the peace, a trending post shipping Elzai with another idol group member. Elzai stared at the screen, her expression unreadable as the digital world decided her romantic fate. Her friends whispered, assuming she was contemplating the weight of her fame and dreams. One friend worried how Hezi would handle seeing Elzai paired off with someone else so publicly. Yet Elzai's only concern was her vanity, grumbling about why they hadn't edited her face better before posting. The group gathered to dissect the scandalous moment that sparked the rumors. You have to be careful, her friend chided. Reaching for water behind someone looks way too intimate. Elzai tilted her head, genuinely confused if that wasn't just what normal friends did. Her friends recoiled, knowing they weren't nearly daring enough to try such a move with their own crushes. Nearby, Hezi watched the exchange, her silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. She finally stepped forward, the atmosphere shifting as she prepared to address the elephant in the room. The others held their breath, terrified that Hezi was about to explode with jealousy. Instead, she blinked and simply asked, "What's a ship?" Her friend sighed, launching into a detailed explanation of shipping dynamics and the concept of top versus bottom. Hezi's eyes lit up as she confidently declared that Elzai was definitely the one in charge. "Calm down," her friend cried, shocked that she was actually leaning into this weird conversation. Hezi just grinned, asking if she'd get a prize for guessing the dynamic correctly. Her friend warned her that if the fans loved the ship, Elzai might have to play along for the cameras. Hezi's expression softened into a look of absolute certainty as she said it would only be real when Elzai was with her. A deep, crimson blush crept up Elzai's neck at the bold confession. The friends watched on in awe, hiding behind their sunglasses as the density of the air changed. Suddenly, a makeshift lesson on the apartment's internal ships began on a chalkboard. It was decided that Jane was the assertive one in her pairing with Swanzi. Next, Akari was crowned the dominant force over a blushing Xiaoyu. Finally, Hezi claimed her spot as the top in her relationship with Elzai, much to the group's amusement. Turning back to her crush, Hezi reassured Elzai that she understood the burdens of being a public figure. "I'll wait for you no matter what," she promised, her voice steady and sincere. Elzai's heart skipped a beat, overwhelmed by the depth of Hezi's devotion. But the sentimentality vanished when Hezi pulled out a knife, threatening anyone who dared cross the line with her girl. A friend's eyes widened as she realized this was finally a mutual confession. "So, are you two officially together now?" she asked, cutting through the chaos. The word "together" echoed in Hezi's mind, sending her into a total tailspin. The sheer intensity of the moment was too much, and Hezi promptly passed out on the floor. Her friends exchanged knowing, mischievous smiles at the predictable collapse. Xiaoyu beamed, happy to see the progress they had finally made. Even Akari joined in the smiling, though she was entirely sure what was happening. Elzai stood there, flustered and waving her hands in a desperate attempt attempt to hide her embarrassment. Once things settled, a friend congratulated them on finally crossing the finish line. Elzai looked down, admitting she still had many concerns about the future. She wanted her career, but she felt the heavy responsibility of her feelings for Hezi. Suddenly, Hezi bolted upright, shouting her promise to wait for as long as it took. She begged for a promise in advance, her eyes pleading for a future together. Elzai's heart melted, and she softly agreed to the pact. They shared a tender, lingering gaze that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Blushing, they both turned away, two young hearts finally finding their rhythm. The reunion at Lily Apartments should have been a celebration, but the air is thick with a tension that even the New Year's festivities couldn't wash away. While Hezi's heart is finally finding its rhythm in a long-awaited love story, a digital firestorm is erupting online as fans begin obsessing over the Zixu ship. Elzai is completely trapped in her own head, the echoes of a desperate plea to go out with me ringing louder than any music. The girl is a walking disaster, staring into the void over her breakfast while her friends exchange worried glances. She wanders through the streets like a ghost in a hoodie, her surroundings a total blur of gray. Even as she arrives backstage, she's in such a deep trance that she barely notices the bustling staff around her. On stage, her performance is so robotic that Suxu has to snap at her wake up before they ruin the entire show. Once the lights dim and they retreat backstage, Suxu corners her, eyes narrowing as she demands to know what on earth is going on. Elzai finally cracks, leaning in to whisper the scandalous secret that's been eating her alive. But Suxu's reaction is a total curveball. She just nods calmly, acting like the news of Elzai and Hezi is yesterday's gossip. Elzai is practically vibrating with indignation, screaming internally because her best friend isn't giving her the dramatic reaction she expected. Suxu just sighs, pointing out all the times Hezi hovered around like a devoted puppy, picking Elzai up from work. She reminds her of the quiet, romantic moments, like when he'd show up just to hold umbrella over her head in the rain. They were even seen holding hands while crossing the road, a gesture so domestic it practically screamed couple. Elzai's face turns a brilliant shade of crimson as she insists they were absolutely, definitely just friends. The conversation shifts to the trending Weibo feed, where the fans are losing their minds over the two idols. Suxu plays it cool, promising she won't let the fan theories get in the way of Elzai's real-life romance. For a moment, Elzai is touched by the maturity, looking at her friend with newfound respect. That respect vanishes instantly when Suxu bluntly adds that Elzai isn't even remotely her type anyway. Elzai's heart sinks as she worries that they're just taking advantage of the fans' delusions for the sake of fame. She looks down, feeling a heavy weight of guilt that her popularity might not be coming from her actual talent. Suxu starts to offer a rare moment of comfort, but the moment is shattered when a staff member shouts that a fan gift has arrived. Curiosity piqued, the two girls head over to see what their shippers have sent. Elzai is practically sparkling, hoping for something pink, cute, and aesthetic to match her brand. Suxu, ever the classic soul, is putting her money on a beautiful bouquet of flowers. Instead, they are met with a giant, terrifying floral wraith that looks like it belongs at a high-end funeral. They stand there in a stunned, horrifying silence, staring at the morbid tribute. Suxu, trying to find a silver lining in the madness, suggests they at least take a photo to show the fans they received it. They sit together in front of the shrine, their expressions a mix of confusion and pure dread. Looking at the preview on the screen, Elzai can't help but feel that this entire situation has spiraled out of control. Suddenly, they're summoned to the manager's office, and the vibe is professional yet predatory. The boss doesn't mince words. The company wants them to lean into the rumors and start fake dating for the cameras. He leans forward, his glasses glinting as he tells them they need to make the fans truly feel their love. To ensure they get into character, he issues a bizarre decree. They are to remain hand in hand until the very end of the workday. The fan service begins immediately, with the two of them clutching hands while performing under the hot stage lights. They don't let go even during a press gauntlet, facing a sea of microphones with their fingers tightly interlaced. The act continues backstage, though the smiles are starting to feel a little strained. It reaches a peak of absurdity when Suxu refuses to break the grip even when Elzai desperately needs a bathroom break. The company is pulling out all the stops, calling them in for yet another strategy meeting. They are presented with matching costumes that scream couple goals. Even their accessories are coordinated down to the last stitch to sell the lie. But when they're handed nameplates that literally say Zygzu Supremacy, Elzai realizes the company has no shame. Looking out at the crowd, the venue is packed with fans waving glowing signs for the new ship. Elzai's stomach turns with a mix of guilt and conflict as she realizes how many people are invested in this fake romance. She turns to Suxu, hoping to find a kindred spirit in this sea of lies. But Suxu is only annoyed that she isn't being portrayed as the top of the relationship by the fans. They throw themselves into the performance, moving in perfect, practiced synchronicity. The chemistry is palpable as they touch faces and gaze into each other's eyes for the screaming crowd. They end the set by forming a perfect heart with their arms, the ultimate gift to the shippers. But Elzai's heart nearly stops when she spots a familiar face in the crowd Hezi is watching, and he does not look happy. After the show, Elzai finds him waiting at the entrance, her pulse racing with nerves. He looks at her with a soft, genuine smile, praising her performance despite the chaos. Elzai, feeling defensive, asks if he thinks her ship with Suxu was amazing too. Hezi doesn't back down, leaning in close until their breaths mingle, whispering that he thinks his eye suits them much better. As Elzai prepares to leave with him, she waves a quick goodbye to a lingering Suxu. Without warning, Hezi reaches out and captures her hand, his grip firm and possessive. Elzai's breath hitches at the sudden contact, her heart hammering against her ribs. He looks at her with a trace of jealousy, admitting that since Su held her hand all day, he finally wants his turn. Su stands alone in the hallway, watching the two of them from the shadows. She sees them laughing, the genuine spark between them impossible to ignore. She watches them walk away, her expression unreadable as she lingers in the silence they left behind.